Let me first introduce myself. My name is Boschma. I'm here Director of Circle and a Professor in Innovation Studies here at Lund University. And we are co-organizing this workshop together with Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum. Professor Pontus Braunerhjelm is also heavily involved in that from KTH in Stockholm. And also, of course, very much linked to the Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum, and he will take the word after me. But what I would like to do is just to give you a short introduction on this workshop, why we decided to organize a workshop like this with this particular topic. Well, as you might still recall, the Shanghai ranking has just been published. I think it was a few weeks ago, and of course, if we like it or not, we get informed by those rankings, and of course, every university is very keen on seeing on what position it has on that list every year. The bit of the background of this workshop is whether those university rankings make sense, what type of information is in it, what type of criteria are used, do they make sense, do they fully cover that we are really interested in and what university ranking should be about. Are there still criteria missing that we might believe to be crucial in that respect, and does a university ranking even make sense in a way? Of course, as I said, they attract a lot of attention from the media and also, of course, from university administrators. Especially when universities are high ranked, of course, that information is immediately put on the website of the university, and when a ranking is disappointing for a university, of course, what you tend to see in the media then that the rankings themselves are criticized, and that the criteria that are used should be improved in that respect. So there's always a lot of debate going on. It attracts a lot of attention from the media and also feeds immediately into to what extent the university systems in countries have to improve more in general, and whether performance of universities should be improved in particular. There are also many university rankings, which also makes it even more complicated. Of course, the Shanghai ranking, the academic ranking of world universities, is the most well-known. And I always thought that it already existed for a very long time. This is not indeed the case. This is it only exists since, I think, 2001 or 2002. So it's still relatively young, but still everybody knows about it. And there's, of course, another important university ranking, which is the Times Higher Education ranking, which is also which always draws a lot of attention from everybody, including the media. Well, of course, there's a lot of debate on whether it is actually useful to make this type of benchmarking exercises. I think, going a bit through the literature, I always have the feeling that there might be indeed a need to have those university rankings, but at the same time, they're also heavily criticized. Just let me outline a few of the limitations that have been put forward in those type of debates. One is, for example, that entire universities are ranked instead of departments or even university programs. Other issue and a limitation that is often found is that universities might differ considerably between each other in terms of the missions they have, in terms of the specializations they have, whether they have more data scientists as compared to social sciences. Another limitation that is often put forward in those debates is also that quite many of those rankings tend to focus almost exclusively on research performance. This might be a bit less true for the Times Higher Education ranking, which also includes all kinds of indicators of teaching quality, as they call it. But still, there seems to be a bias towards research. And to be honest, and I think this is one of the main discussions we have right now, at least in the Netherlands where I come from, is the so-called third mission of universities, and those indicators that might come close to measure those third mission are almost completely absent in those rankings, which is quite striking. And another limitation, but I won't go too much into detail, but because we have excellent speakers that know much more about this topic than I do. But last that I would like to mention is that also one of the limitations that have been put forward is that most of those rankings measure past performance instead of current performance, especially when they look at Nobel Prize winners. Of course, the reason why they got the Nobel Prize is because of research they did a long time ago. So many have criticized those university rankings also for that particular reason. So on the one hand, there seems to be quite a need to have those rankings, and on the other hand, the rankings that exist seem to be heavily criticized. So it's time to have an interesting seminar on this with people that have a lot of expertise on that, and that's why we decided to organize this workshop. As you can see in the program, it consists of 2 parts. The first part will devote attention to university rankings themselves. What type of information is in it? What criteria do they use? What type of methodology is performed? Are there indicators that we found missing and that we think should be absolutely included in those rankings? So that will be mainly discussed in the first part of the workshop, which is really about comparisons of university rankings. And we are very pleased to have 2 excellent speakers that will introduce this topic to us. The first speaker will be Don Westerheijden, a Dutch colleague of mine, who is from CHEPS in Twente University. Of course, I will introduce him much later when I will give him the floor. But he will talk about a new type of university ranking that accounts for some of the limitations that I've just underlined. Then I'm very happy also to have Koen Frenken as a second speaker, who will more talk about determinants of university rankings. And he has done some very insightful empirical study on that, and he will share that with us this afternoon. And that the 2 presentations then will be followed by excellent panelists that will further discuss the topic and go into debate. And of course, the audience is also invited to contribute to that discussion. And then the second part of the workshop is really about, okay, what do university rankings really mean for all the stakeholders that might be interested and have an interest in those rankings? First of all, of course, university administrators. How important is it for them? And to what extent do they take those rankings seriously? And if so, do they in fact pursue any policy that is geared towards looking good and try to improve the positions on those university rankings? But of course, there's also a very important stakeholder that might find university ranking exercise very interesting, is students. to what extent do those rankings reflect the interest of students? To what extent do they also mean something to students in terms of where they will do their bachelor or where they do their master? And of course, other stakeholders like policymakers. To what extent do policymakers take those rankings very seriously? Of course, one of our main speakers and contributor to the panel is Peter Honeth, Secretary of State from Department of Education and Research, and I'm sure he's a lot to say on this. To what extent do they take seriously university rankings, and if so, how? And then, of course, there is still another stakeholder that might be interested in these type of rankings, and those are scientists. To what extent do they choose to go and work for a particular university? And is university ranking, and high ranking on those university leagues, is that a quite crucial motive to make a decision to work at some university? So there are quite a lot of very relevant and interesting questions to be addressed, and to what extent those university rankings really already mean a lot to all those stakeholders, and to what extent they really work with those rankings. So I think I'll leave it to that. I will now give the floor to Pontus, who will say something more on the workshop and say something about the topic. Pontus, please.
Thank you, Ron. I will be brief. Just let me try to get this up here. Okay, thank you. My name is Pontus Braunerhjelm. I'm the Managing Director of the Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum. I'm professor also in economics at the KTH and heading the Department of Industrial Economics and Management, Prefect. And my third hat right now is that I'm chairing the Committee on Entrepreneurship Climate that was set up by Anders Borg and Annie Lööf some months ago. I'm going to take you through just a brief presentation of the Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum, since I'm from another place, Utrecht today, so I will take the chance and introduce that to you, since you're all well aware of what Circle is doing, I'm pretty sure. So we've been around for 20 years. We're established in 1994, and this is what we do. We initiate, we conduct, but we put a lot of emphasis on the communication of research. We work through different networks, and we like to initiate and stimulate debate on policy-relevant research issues. So that is sort of a guiding star for us. I'd say it's around 25 to 35 publications coming out, research report, working papers, policy briefs, etc. We do about 40 conferences. We have had an excellent cooperation with Circle and Ron here, and we have drawn on our different networks in this particular area that we are addressing today. We have a very diversified structure when it comes to funding. About 15 people employed at the Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum. Projects presently that we are undertaking, we have the Swedish Economic Forum report. Last year it was about institutions and incentives for innovations. We are part of the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor project. There the data gathered are mostly used in research. It's the world's most extensive survey on entrepreneurship, activities, attitudes and ambitions. We have something called Mission Welfare, or perhaps Mission Impossible, that deals with how to organize the welfare sector, which is an interesting project. And then we have a large project funded by the Wallenberg Foundation, Marianne Marcus, called Regulation, Entrepreneurship and Dynamic Markets. So that's about it. And then we have some smaller projects, but I will not dwell into that. We do work to different platforms, and we compose these by people coming from the business sector, from the public sector and researchers. They defined, and this is the communicating pillar of what we are doing, not the pure research, so to speak. They define the issue to bring up and to present the report in, say, 3 to 6 months, and then to put that out to the relevant target groups. So Globaliseringsforum is headed by Ulf Berg, who was previously the head of Exportrådet. Näringspolitiskt Forum, Industrial Forum, is headed by Per Adolfsson, previously head of Microsoft Sweden. Philanthropic Forum is still headed by Maria Rank. And then we have a scientific council, we have an international council, and we have at Ungt Forskarforum, young researchers in this area, where we organize conferences and let these young researchers meet people that they don't normally meet in the seminar rooms. We give out some prizes to put the limelight on this area in research. So we have the Global Award for Entrepreneurship Research. We say it's only next to another prize that is handed out in December, at least when it comes to economics, and annually being given. So it's 100,000 euro. I'm sure there must be some other prize as well, but it's one of the biggest for sure. We have the Young Research Prize, and that is for the best PhD or for the best dissertation. That's an annual thing also. And then we have an annual prize going to the most successful entrepreneur while still being at the universities. Do we have an impact? We think we have. We're a voice in a choir, but I think we have some impact in different areas, and that we have this ongoing dialogues with a lot of people, and we do work relatively close with the World Bank, OECD, and the Commission on different aspects. Okay, so that's the Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum. Now, some thoughts before we start the seminar, and I mean, basically, we're all obsessed by rankings. I look at Charles, I mean, how many citations does he have? And he probably looks at me, and Ron looks at me, and I look at Ron. So as soon as you start some kind of ranking, it gains a lot of attention, no doubt. And the thing is, and I think so, Ron, you already said this, I would say, so I will not go into any details, but I mean, the issue at stake here is, of course, is this a good thing? I mean, what do we need all these rankings? Well, again, of course, it depends, and the devil is in the details. I mean, what are we actually measuring, and do we sort of follow up these criteria? And on the jobs, or rather the future labor market, how does that look for students? That's probably part that is not very that is pronounced in these different ranking studies. But basically, I think it is should be a good thing. First, because you need that kind of information in a globalized context, not least being a student. So they could serve a very useful purpose. The other is, of course, that universities, I think, need to become aware that we're part of a globalized context today. If we are going to be attractive, then we also have to show excellence, at least in some areas. So it could be, I should say, something that is quite important. I just put together some figures from the latest Shanghai ranking that came out 15th of August. And as always, there is a heavy US dominance. They have 8 universities on the top 10 list, 16 among the 20, and so forth. If you look at only the US and Europe, I think they have 92 of the universities at 100 top list. So they are very dominating. UK has a relatively pronounced position, having 2 universities then on the top 10. So they're definitely best in Europe, 8 among the 100 and so on. Netherlands, I think, is an interesting example, having 1 university, ETH in Zurich, among the top 20, and they seem to do pretty well. Switzerland, what did I say? Okay, I mean Switzerland, of course. Thanks for that. He's an economic geographer, but yeah. Thanks. So the Switzerland and the Netherlands are 2 interesting examples. Sweden has 3 on top. on the top 100 list. And you can read for yourselves there when you increase that number, 11 on the top 500. It's approximately the same ranking as last year. The shifts are minor really, but I think Karolinska Institutet went down a few rankings, and Uppsala University and Stockholm University up a few. We have no top university among, or no university in natural science and math among the top 200. But our strongholds are in engineering and in life and agricultural science, particularly in the clinical medicine and pharma. Sorry about that, spelling mistakes, and physics. So that seems to be the Swedish position. We do relatively well compared to the other Nordic countries and to a number of other small countries. Even though Denmark, Norway, and Finland have universities better ranked than we have, with the exception of Karolinska Institutet. But we do less well compared to Switzerland and Netherlands. And one question may be why it is like that, and should it stay like that? And does it indicate some sort of improvements that needs to be undertaken? Is it a problem in a sense? So with that slide put together on the train coming here, I will end my introduction and hand the word back to you, Ron, so you can introduce our first speaker. And it's really good to see so many people here. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Pontus. We are very good on schedule. What I would like to do is to go to the next part of our program, and that is to introduce the first speaker. That is Don Westerheijden. He's Senior Associate at CHEPS, which stands for Center for Higher Education Policy Studies at Twente University, a university I used to work for 3 years. And it's really nice to have you here, Don. And I think the reason why we invited Don, because he has a lot of expertise on quality assessments in higher educations, and also has been heavily engaged in research on university rankings. And in fact, he has been part of a group of people that have worked on an alternative university rankings called U-Multirank, which is supported by the European Commission, and that tries to account for a number of shortcomings that I mentioned in my introduction. So of course I won't say too much on the content of your presentation, of course, Don, but please, I invite you to come forward and do the presentation on U-Multirank diversity and performance. So please, the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Ron, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. I was happy to get the invitation, and I'm very pleased that I can come here and to tell you a few things about this new ranking, which we think is an interesting alternative to most of the other ones which are around in the world. I would like to frame the effort we did for developing U-Multirank in a little introduction about the role and importance of diversity in higher education. So that's where I would like to start, and then I would like to go into the issue of U-Multirank itself, give a few glimpses of what we can do with it, what you can do with it, because the U in Multirank is intended to be you out there, and certainly not us as the people who are making the ranking. As Ron said, I'm part of a team who are working on it. It's not just CHEPS, not just the University of Twente in Holland. We are one of the two lead organizations. The other one is CHE in Germany, Center for Higher Education Development, who have experience in making a national ranking aimed especially at students in Germany, with all its pros and cons. I mean, it's heavily discussed, but we still thought it was one of the best that we could find, and we've been working together on development of this tool for 4 years now. And some of the other colleagues are in Leiden University, who are developing the materials on the research performance, etc. And there's some other people involved as well for some information about what was mentioned already, the third mission of universities. All right, diversity. A few short remarks about some understanding, some further details about the term itself, how it's ignored by traditional rankings, one further concept of process versus performance, how to make that distinction, and then U-Multirank itself, and a short, well, introduction to what it is. Why should higher education be diverse at all in the present circumstances of the 21st century? Well, first of all, higher education is something which is not anymore just for the elite 5% of every age cohort, which it used to be about a century ago when this university was built, I suppose. But it's now intended for about half of the population. 50% of our every age cohort should go into higher education is one of the aims that we have in our Western countries. So we have a wide variety of students, and therefore wide variety of knowledge when coming into higher education, wide variety of interest. So we need to give a wide variety of education to them, to provide the possibilities of education remaining a tool for social mobility, to meet the more diverse needs of the labor market. Higher education is demanded for ever more jobs and careers, and certainly not anymore just for the research next generation, which it used to be, plus some of the old and venerable professions like medicine and law. Well, there's some economists here. I mean, that's a new thing since the Second World War. There are many more new areas. Through that, higher education can play a better role of being part of the machinery preserving social stability in our societies. So there's some idea of fairness, equity, inclusion, and cohesiveness for society. That's also something we have to play a role in. And if you have diverse higher education institutions in a system, it's possible for them to specialize in certain things. You can have community colleges, you can have technical universities, you can have specialized business schools, etc. And finally, what I would like to mention here is that from a perspective of national policies, it's important to have diversity so that you can experiment a bit with different forms of higher education in your society, rather than having a single mold, a single model. There's a little bit about the concept of diversity which we think we need to analyze, and I won't go into it too deeply because we only have a short time to make this introduction. But first, I already gave some examples of institutional diversity. Higher education institutions can be comprehensive, they can be specialized, they can be the highest level of the research institute, PhD training, or they can go for mass education at a lower level, such as community colleges do in the United States. But within universities you can also have all kinds of diversity, bachelor, master, PhD levels. Level 5 is now being introduced in many countries, so that's below the bachelor level, but also an important area of education. Program diversity also in the sense of having different areas from medicine to physics to biology and arts, for instance. And with that, I am already introducing some of the ideas between horizontal and vertical diversity. Vertical diversity is kind of this picture. There's a single mountain. This happens to be Mount Fuji in otherwise an almost flat country. And the suggestion is that if you're on top of this mountain, you're world class, and all the rest seems to be worthless. And that seems to be the message that some of the worldwide rankings are producing. You have to be in the top 100, otherwise you're not really worthwhile. Now I happen to come from a country which is much flatter than Japan. We don't have any mountains like that. We have windmills. And that can help to explain the idea that these windmills have different functions. One of them may be for pumping the water out of the polder into the canal. Another one might be for sawing wood. Third one might be for milling grain. And the idea is that we need all of them. They are different, but they're of equal value. They're equal worth. And that's then the idea of having horizontal diversity. You want to have this diversity in higher education as well. For instance, you want to have surgeons in an operating room. You also want to have good nurses there. If you miss either one of them, the operation won't be very successful. So different, but of equal importance. And that's the idea that we wanted to bring into the discussion on university rankings. They've been around for just over 10 years now, these global rankings. Shanghai was the first one, 2003. The Times came up the next year, together with, at that time, a company called QS, who did the rankings for them. Later on, they split, and now we have 3 of them, the Shanghai, the Times, and QS. And we've got more other rankings. I mean, in fact, there's a host of them. The longer you search, the more you will find. What we presented later on, the Leiden Ranking, which is focusing on research publication and research impact. There are some for specialized fields, such as the MBAs, and you will have international and national ones, but we're looking only at the international, the global ones. The elements of critique have already been mentioned mostly. The Shanghai and Times rankings mostly focus on institutions as a whole. They don't care about the programmatic variance inside. At least that's how they started nowadays, and the second presenter already gave some examples. Nowadays they are also specializing into different fields, so you have a ranking for natural sciences, a ranking for medicine, a ranking for economics, etc. They concentrate heavily, not exclusively, but heavily on traditional research, the academic research, mode 1 research as it's sometimes called. And in that way they seem to be promoting one model of university. If you want to be a world-class university, you have to be a comprehensive university with lots of hard sciences, lots of medicine, who do a lot of research. So the comprehensive research university seems to be the university for the whole world. If you actually look at higher education institutions around the world, we got many more models, and they are not valued by these rankings. Apart from this, let's say, more global critique, you can go into the methodology, and then there's a second set of 4 points here which talk about the critique you can have on them. They use overall indicators, they position universities in a league table, as if the difference between numbers 1 and 2 is equally important as the difference between number 91 and number 92. Maybe, but I don't know. The databases that they're using for the information about research productivity and research impact is somewhat biased towards English. In fact, heavily biased towards English, but it is getting better. And there's a bias against the sciences which don't produce journal articles a lot, because that's what mostly counted in these databases. Linking to that, one more issue, which is that there are many people who are interested in higher education, many people who are interested in how higher education performs, many different stakeholders with different perspectives. We thought, what we need is not a single ranking for all of the world. Maybe we should try to get rid of them, but of course we can't think them away anymore. They are there. They are popular. I mean, every university chancellor will quickly look at his position or her position in the newest rankings, which are published every time. Everybody else looks at them as well. So instead of thinking them away and just critiquing them, we thought we better do something different. Acknowledging the diversity in higher education, we thought we should be making rankings not of every institution across this same triangle, the same mountain, but identify institutions which are comparable. For that, we have developed, we had already developed another tool, U-Map, University Mapping, a classification tool to find the diversity of institutions horizontally. And if you have that, you have a certain set of comparable institutions, then you can try to make the actual comparison, and that's what we try to do with U-Multirank. In the well-known and very general picture of processes in higher education or in any organization, you have, of course, inputs which are being transformed into outputs and which have further consequences. Outcomes. For the steering of such a process, you need some feedback. And in the quality world, that's called a plan, do, check, and act cycle. You can see the whole picture as a plan, do, check, and act cycle. You can also say, well, the institutional management, they are somewhere in the corner there. They are trying to organize all of this process, and they have to work on that part of the university and make sure that the teachers, the researchers are doing their work and can produce their outputs. Such a picture was too complicated for us, too complicated for working in a practical way. So we made a rough division into the inputs, which we don't mention that much, the activities, in fact the actual process, what's being done, which is overlapping somewhat with the input, because from a management perspective, providing the inputs, making sure that there is a university building, that staff are appointed, is a management type of activity, so that's important there. And then outputs and outcomes, I mean the difference between what's being done directly and what happens afterwards in a number of years in society or by citations, etc. The distinction is not very strict, so let's just call everything performance. And then the idea is that with U-Multirank we only focus on the performance and try to find indicators of university performance rather than of university activities and not of university inputs, because that would be another methodological issue we would have with the common global rankings, that they are mixing up everything. Just measure whatever is measurable and add it up, and what's the model behind it? What's really the actual meaning of all of this? So we want to focus on performance as much as we can, and as we said, we want to use a tool, U-Map, to find actual profiles of activities, what are universities actually doing, and try to use that to develop our new ranking. The importance of trying to find out what institutions are actually doing is because if you want to make a worldwide ranking of higher education institutions, not all of them focused on this model of the world-class research university. You get all kinds of different names. You have regional colleges, you have polytechnics, you have Fachhochschulen, all kinds of different names in different languages. I couldn't even pronounce them, let alone understand what they all mean. And even the same name doesn't always have the same meaning. I mean, university in one country is not the same as university in another country. How much research is involved in a university, or is it parceled out to academy institutes or something similar? So we want to know what the institutions are actually doing to be able to compare institutions which are actually doing the same type of things. And that leads then to, we have just over 10 minutes, 3 things I would like to say about U-Multirank. It has been called the researchers' ranking. What we would devise if researchers on themselves could develop a ranking rather than the publishers of the Times, for instance. So one of the things coming from this critique against taking universities as a whole and adding everything up into a single number is U-Multirank doesn't give you the statement University X is the 5th in the world. It will give a number of multi-dimensional rankings, so that's where the multi-ranking comes from. Through a process of involvement of stakeholders, discussions with policymakers, with university representatives, with student representatives, mostly at the European level, a little bit at the global level. We selected a number of indicators, 30 odd of them, which are as much as possible performance measures rather than input measures in these 5 different areas of performance, the dimensions of performance. It's teaching and learning, it's research, of course, knowledge transfer, and international orientation and regional orientation or regional engagement. So the 3 major functions of universities are included. And then, yeah, where are you aiming at? National, international, and or regional. I could provide here an overview of all these 30 indicators. 30 indicators at the institutional level. If we go down to the program level or the field level, as we call it here, there are even more of them. So all I want to do now is here show that in these 5 dimensions we have a number of indicators, and they are somewhat overlapping, but also sometimes different for the institutional level and for the separate fields. That goes for teaching and learning, and especially in teaching and learning, one of the things we've taken from the national rankings and brought into the world of the global rankings is the idea that you can survey students to ask about their satisfaction with the programs they are following. So we have student satisfaction indicators at the field level, not at the institution level. Because that would be meaningless, we think. We got some research, performance, and yeah, to some extent, I must admit, also some activities and inputs, because you can't always find your performance measures. The data are simply not there. Got information about knowledge transfer, patents, spin-offs, continuous professional development, so that's continuing courses or post-experience courses. We ask questions about international orientation of an institution, how strong are you doing these type of things, and regional engagement as well. Where do your students come from? Where are they getting their jobs? Are you working with your companies in the region, shown by regional research publications, etc. Another one of the comments that we have with, or another one of the issues we have with the international traditional rankings is that they count all of these different indicators and add them up so that you get number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. In fact, they're weighting all these indicators, and there is no theory that says this is the right weighting. So we don't want to do that. We just give the different individual scores. And it's up to the user of the ranking, the reader of the ranking, the user of the web tool, because that's what we mostly work with, or only work with, in fact. It's up to the user to decide which aspect is important for you at this moment. So it's your way of making a ranking, and we only provide the data. We don't provide a single definitive ranking at all. We're doing that at 2 levels, as I said, at the level of the universities as a whole, because for some purposes it is important to focus at the university as a whole, or for some stakeholders it's more important, for university rectors, presidents, for policymakers at the national level, but most probably not for students. So we also want to give these ranking performances in specific fields or disciplines. We've been developing that with the aid of the European Commission. Yeah, for several reasons they wanted to support such a thing. In May of this year we published for the first time our database, our ranking information, which included over 850 universities with publicly available data. 500 of them have provided pretty comprehensive data, so they were actively involved in the data collection and verification. The other 350, we only used the publicly available data already. They come from 70 different countries, so it's certainly not a European ranking, even though it was supported by the European Union, but it's a worldwide one. Biased towards Europe at this moment, I have to admit. In all of these institutions, more than 1,000 faculties or departments have been included in this first year in 4 fields only. You can read them here: physics, mechanical and electrical engineering, and business studies. those 1,000 faculties or departments included more than 5,000 study programs, and this student survey has been completed by more than 60,000 students around the world. And one of the, let's say, for me, surprising outcomes was that it was relatively comparable. There doesn't seem to be very large biases from students from one country to the other. I mentioned already 70 countries from all around the world, biased towards Europe, 62%, 17% from North America, 15% from Asia, and then smaller percentages from Africa, Latin America, and Oceania, including Australia. And a wide variety of institutions, as you can read here, PhD awarding to applied sciences, small and large, specialized, comprehensive, old and younger. I don't have time here to go into the web tool that we have as the major communication element. So all I can show you is that there is a web page, U-Multirank.org, which welcomes you with different texts and colors. The green channel is important for the students. We made a pre-selection based on our discussions and previous experiences with students on what for them would be relevant elements. The orange channel is rather for those who are interested in universities as a whole. So you can compare in institutions which you select on a number of theoretical grounds, or you can start it with your own university, the at a glance comparison, and see which others are more or less like yours. And for instance, for students, we have only these 4 fields this year. We'll be adding a couple of fields for next year. If you click on such a channel, you get into a selection process, which is using this tool to find institutions which are comparable, or fields which are comparable, fields at institutions which are comparable. The same would be for people who are interested in universities as a whole. And the next thing that you would come to is then, well, the question, what do you want to compare? Do you want to compare institutions which are spending a lot of their money on teaching rather than on research, which have a lot of graduate students or not? And in this moment I'm showing an example of selecting institutions which are heavily involved in education, mostly on first and second cycle, as we call it in Europe. So bachelor and master level in a number of different fields. Don't have any preferences for research. For instance, if you are a student, or if you are heading an institution which is focusing on students a lot, maybe it's interesting to know whether there is a difference between institutions which are providing a lot of research on at the same time or not. With at least some knowledge transfer, you can choose that as well. You could go down, internationalization and some other elements. And what you end up then with is an overview like this. On the left-hand side, you see a number of institutions ranked firstly purely by alphabet or by one of these indicators. You can choose them. You'll get all these, well, a selection of the 30 indicators. You can choose all of them. We just made a pre-selection of what seems to be most relevant for people with such an interest, and that will be fine-tuned on the basis of the use of the website. And the larger the dot, the better is the performance of an institution at that indicator. If you would click on one university, you would get it's kind of a sunburst graph showing all around what it's doing. And of course, coming here, I selected the graph of Lund University. Lund is not an active university, so all we have is the public data, mostly on research, which is the purple part on the right-hand side. Something on knowledge transfer, the blue part on the bottom. And from publication data, we also know something about international orientation and regional engagement. If you have an active university, for instance, this was Gothenburg here in Sweden, they would have also some information on education, the green part, the teaching and learning part. Not everything, because apparently, and some of these indicators, even though we try to, let's say, evaluate them internationally, are not valid here or cannot be defined by a Swedish university. So there are still some gaps in the information. Same for internationalization, etc. If you want to make a quick start with U-Multirank, you might also have a look at Readymade rankings, which is also a possibility. We offer 3 of them, one on research, kind of seeing how much we can copy the usual global rankings, one on economic involvement, so that's basically about knowledge transfer, and one, an example for business studies for students. And the one on economic involvement would look like this, and the institutions you would get on top if you take one of these knowledge transfer information indicators, this one on co-publications, for instance, with industrial partners, you don't see the usual suspects on top, but quite different ones. A Paris Tech on telecom, and a University of Applied Science from Austria, from Wiener Neustadt, for instance. And in fact, if we analyze all of the data that we have, and I'm getting near to the end, you would see that the A scores, or the very best scores for each of the universities, you could have 30 if you score very well on all of these 30 indicators. The actual range is from 0 to 21. Well, many universities have some specific strengths. I mean, almost half of them have 46%, almost half of them have 1 to 5 A scores, and 5 to 10% have, 41% have 5 to 10 A scores. So between 1 and 10 A scores is pretty typical of a university. 21 is the maximum, so none has across the board A scores, so there is not one university that's excellent in everything. But still, it's a pretty large number. More than 100 still scored more than 10 A's. Very few, only 2%, score no A's at all. They might be still pretty good, scoring B scores on each of these indicators, but no A's. And interestingly enough, out of these institutions which have A's, 300 were not yet visible in other global rankings. So we are showing, I think, some new types of excellence. And also it shows that these indicators can be distributed meaningfully. We've looked at that, of course, and it shows then that there are actual differences between institutions on these indicators, so they do say something. It also says that we can show the diversity of institutions in an international context. We don't have to live with this single idea of the world-class university as a research university. There is more is possible. It shows also, in our view, that it's not really meaningful to talk about the world's top 100 or top 200 universities overall, because they're not overall that well developed. And we have, I think, a flexible tool that could be used by students, by parents, academics, policymakers, etc., and administrators to find information that can support their different decisions that they want to make about higher education. 2014 was the first step. We're committed to continue with support still of the European Commission for a couple of years. So if you're getting enthusiastic and think my university has to, you still have 2 weeks to join in. And we already have, of course, a lot of new institutions which are joining U-Multirank for 2015. And we're also adding a couple of new fields. From 4 fields last year, we're adding 3 large fields this year: psychology, computer science, and medicine. And I sure hope that this story will be continued. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Don, for an interesting presentation. Of course, many questions might be raised during the panel discussion, but I just want to give now room for 1 or 2 questions, more maybe questions of clarifications, and then after, during the panel discussion, we can go more into detail. So, are there people that have a small question for Don right now? If not,
microphone at the back, and I will try to talk a bit slower when I'm giving my answers, so that it becomes clear.
Yes, Sven. Please, could you use the microphone? Thank you.
there is always a balance between simplicity and maybe less information and complexity and high quality, a lot of information. So one simple question maybe is, how expensive is it to run this ranking that you presented here? How much work do you have to put into it?
Gee, we wouldn't know yet what would be, let's say, the running costs if everything is a routine matter. For the development, yes, it has been pretty expensive to develop it and to start everything up. The Times are apparently doing things much more efficiently with this, the full people, but Shanghai is also somewhat larger, and QS is a very large organization, so I think we're not doing strange things for global rankings.
Thank you.
Yes, just last question. Yes.
Anders Malmberg, Uppsala University. Some leading universities, including the Leiro universities, decided to not become active partners of this. What's your explanation to that? What's that discussion about?
I think that in the end some of the Leiro universities did participate or will participate next year, but the main issue is, of course, it's another ranking. The Leiro universities are research focused, so for them the research focused rankings are doing a good job. And if you talk about expensiveness, it's also expensive to produce all the data for a university, I must admit. I mean, that's also, I guess, one of the reasons.
Yes. All right. Thanks very much, Don.
Okay,
of course, we will see you back during the panel discussion. Yep. Now would like to go to the next presenter of the first part of our program, which is a very good friend of mine, Professor Koen Frenken. He is Professor in Innovation Studies at Utrecht University at Faculty of Geosciences. He's also part of the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development. And last but not least, he is also a guest professor here at Circle at Lund University. His main research interests are in evolution economics, complexity theory, network analysis, and economic geography. But he is also very much interested in science in general, but of course also special attention goes to university ranking. So that's why we decided to invite him, and he will do a very interesting presentation on university rankings and its determinants, in which he will present an empirical analysis on the Leiden ranking, at least using data from the Leiden ranking, and giving us more information about what determines a good university ranking. So please, the floor to Koen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your attendance and for inviting me. My talk is very much in line with the previous speaker, but my exercise is different. So what I do in this talk is that I take one particular ranking that shares in fact many features of the multi-rank, and I'm trying to then explain statistically what determines the rank of particular universities. Is it size? Is it age? Is it the country? Is it the mission? And this. And I do that not just for one indicator, but for multiple indicators. Also in the spirit of the previous presenter, that universities can have different missions, and they may be interested in different determinants in that respect. Now, obviously, the context is already sketched. I think we cannot deny there is a large heterogeneity, both horizontally and vertically, in research performance among universities. So I'm going to look only at research performance. So this heterogeneity is clear. But what those global rankings do, or at least suggest, is that there is some kind of level playing field, some kind of global system in which all these universities participate, compete, and can be compared and ranked. And this has been increasingly criticized for ignoring all sorts of specificities, disciplinary, country or regional specificities, and missions that universities may have. So in this context, I'm going to talk about research performance only. And the goal of my exercise is to find out what are the most important determinants of university ranks. And that information can help individual universities to define a more relevant peer group among which they can compare themselves. So what are the relevant dimensions to construct your peer group in case of research performance? Now these are the three most known rankings, and these have been criticized. And one thing that was not stressed by the previous speaker is that it's very interesting if you just do a correlation between those three rankings, you get pretty low scores, around 0.5. So that already shows and suggests that these rankings are very partial or imprecise, or at least not consistent among them. So they seem to measure different things. A thing that has been stressed is that they are multidimensional, so they combine information on all kinds of dimensions and then apply some weighting scheme that is otherwise not motivated and in fact can never be established in any objective manner. And they're also size sensitive, so some of the indicators automatically go up with size and they don't control for that. It ignores university missions and disciplinary differences. And last but not least, it also ignores national differences in national research systems. For example, if you take Germany, which has a pretty good science, I would say, their universities do not rank very high. But then there are other national institutes where they organize their best research and they're not part of the ranking, even if some of those institutes, like Max Planck, may have very strong linkages with particular universities. So that is something I will stress later on as well. Now, ironically, the rankings say very little about teaching. And why is that ironic? Because they emerged to guide students in their choice, especially Asian students, in their choice of a university. And it has been improved by some of these rankings, but still research is dominating those rankings. So there's this implicit assumption that you get the best teaching at universities where it's the best research, and I think that's a very crude assumption, and I know many examples where that's not the case. But I won't talk about teaching. I won't talk about research performance, and in particular a new ranking now exists for a couple of years, developed by colleagues in Leiden. So Leiden University hosts this Center for Science and Technology Studies that's pretty well known in bibliometric research. So they have been the institute worldwide being most active in using, processing and publishing on the Web of Science data. And they are very conscious about the use and misuse of rankings, and they try to do something different. So what they do is they only offer one-dimensional indicators, so variables, and they're all in an Excel file. They can all be downloaded. It's very transparent. And again, as for the multi-rank, they let the user decide what kind of indicator he or she wants to look at. They also do it for different disciplines separately. I'm not going to talk about that, but that's also included. And they're also very clear in their methodology. And another maybe advantage is that they only make use of Web of Science data and not on surveys or other kinds of, let's say, more subjective type of data. And three of the indicators I'm mostly interested in is the mean citation score of universities, and that is normalized for the particular citation practice in each discipline. So they don't just look at all the citations divided by all publications, but they control for the fact that in some disciplines papers get more or less citations in general. They also have a ranking on university industry co-publications. So that's simply measured by the share of publications by university that's done with industry. That typically ranges between 1 and 10%. And even though some universities may not be very proud of working a lot with industry, other universities actually have this as one of their main missions. So this is a typical example of an indicator that is very mission specific, and it could be seen as a first step towards third mission kind of indicators. And then I also look at the share of international co-publications, so the share of publications by university that is done by together with researchers in other countries. And these indicators solve a lot of problems for me. They are one-dimensional, so I don't need to assign any weights. They're size insensitive. They're always about a mean or a share. They account for disciplinary differences in citation practices, which is important for the first indicator, and it emphasizes the variety of university missions. Now, I'm now going to show you the data, and the data are consists of rankings of 500 universities, the 500 largest universities in the world. This year they published one, the new one, with 750 universities, so it's become even more comprehensive. But still there are many thousand universities excluded, but probably these are the largest universities in terms of number of publications. So these 500 largest already capture almost half of the total research output in the world. And the three first rows are my indicators, so mean normalized citation impact, share of university industry co-publications, and share of international co-publications. And then we constructed a number of variables that may impact how well you score in all those three dimensions. And the first one is the most important one, that is size. And there is a very peculiar relationship between size and especially citation impact, is that larger universities tend to get more citations. And this relationship was already discovered by Van Raan, also from Leiden. There's not been a good explanation for this yet. It does not necessarily mean that larger universities do better research. It can also be that they're more visible. It can also be that they get a lot of citations from other researchers in the same institution. It can be that they have large pockets and can attract highly cited scientists from the labor market. But when coming to such universities, they don't get any better. That's also an outcome of a recent paper. But we have to control for this size effect. And size is here measured by the total number of publications, which is not the best size proxy you can imagine, because it also captures productivity differences, but there are not good data on other size indicators. Then we also looked at age, so we checked the founding year of each of the universities, because it's often claimed that you cannot compare all the universities to younger universities, and some rankings even have special rankings for those universities erected in the last 50 years or so, right? So we looked at that as well, and we looked at the size of the total population of people living in the city where the university is located. So there might be advantages of being located in a large city. There may be industry that you can work with. You have a larger student population, all kinds of other advantages. Then we also looked at technical and medical universities. I won't bother you with the exact definition, but we found about 14% of all universities to be technical universities, and about 6% to be medical schools. And these have typically very different missions, so we wanted to treat them separately. And then we have the main countries, the countries that have at least 10 universities in the Leiden ranking. And in fact, Sweden has exactly 10 in the Leiden ranking, so that accounts for 2% of the 500 universities. And US, for example, has 25%. So 1 out of 4 of the largest universities in terms of research output is American. Now, if you look at the correlation between the main variables, you see it's pretty low. But you see, for example, that technical and medical universities are somewhat smaller, of course. They're more specialized. So that already suggests it's good to take both sides and those orientations into account. And then we look at the results. So this is a bit a big table for some people, very well-known kind of way of presenting results, for others not. So I'll guide you through it. So here we have the first indicator we want to explain. So how well does a university do on mean citation impact? Well, turns out that size is very important. Yeah? But that was already a known result I commented on. Age has no effect, and that, for me, that was a surprise. I always thought all the universities more reputed, more time to build good governance structures, that they would do better. But for these 500 largest universities, there's no effect. In fact, older universities may be larger and therefore more cited, but it's not the age in itself that explains citations. And then the size of the city you're located in has a very small effect, and it's actually negative. Yeah, so this may actually indicate that the best location for universities in terms of doing research is not the largest cities, but maybe a small city close to a larger city. Then you have both, the best of both worlds, nice environment to live, to study, and at the same time good accessibility and supporting economy in the next large cities. Think of Cambridge, Oxford, or Lund, or Leiden for that matter. Now then we see, also to my surprise, the technical universities have quite a big impact on citation, and positive. So the whole notion that technical universities are more applied and therefore their research will be of lower quality is in this way, if you measure it in this way, is not supported. Again, if you look at the rankings, apart from MIT, there are not many technical universities highly ranked, but that's not because they're technical, but maybe because they're much smaller, or they are dominant, or they are more present in countries that as a country do worse than other countries. And then we have the individual countries. And here I should stress that those values are not taken to mean the quality of a national research system or something. What it means is that there are structural differences between certain countries in terms of how well they do in citation impact that may not necessarily reflect differences in the quality of research, but it can also be difference in language or organization of research and all that. For example, US, not surprisingly, scores highest, and Germany much lower, but as I stressed, same for France, they do their top research typically outside the university. Yeah, and that's why exactly you would have to control for these differences to say something about the other variables. I come to Netherlands and Sweden later on because the comparison was already mentioned. Maybe we can say something about that. But then university industry. Now, that variable ranges here from 1% to 16%. Actually, the university that does most of its publications with industry is Eindhoven University of Technology. And that technology was founded because Philips wanted a university in their city. So the mission of that university has been imprinted from the start, and they're very proud of scoring very high on this ranking. Now, obviously, technical universities are more oriented towards business, and that explains about 1% of the difference. Not much, just 1% on average higher, controlling for all these other things. And interestingly, large differences between countries, but the differences are different if you compare it to citation impact. For example, here, US doesn't score so high, but Sweden or South Korea, Netherlands, Japan, they score very high. They have research systems that are very well embedded with industry, at least as you can indicate it by publications among them. So national differences are already apparent between if you focus on research as such or you focus on industry-relevant research. Finally, international publications, that ranges from 14 to 73%. Obviously, there the country is extremely important because smaller countries would always be more prone to work internationally because there are much fewer opportunities to collaborate in the same country. So here you see that, for example, US has a negative score. Well, because there are so many opportunities to collaborate within the US, it's not so surprising. But what I find informative is that, for example, Japan, South Korea, and China score very low. So these systems are not internationalized yet, at least compared to countries like France and Germany. Now, if you are interested in what these kinds of analysis actually explain, so this gives you an indication of how much is explained by this kind of statistical exercise, then citation impact can be explained pretty well, and it is especially explained by size and country. But those two other indicators have a quite low explanatory power, and that also says something. That says that apparently there are many more factors not included in the analysis that explain how prone an university is to work with industry or to work abroad. Sweden. Well, the funny thing here is that if you want to express it in terms of some kind of performance, then Sweden scores pretty good on all three dimensions, but never very high compared to other countries. So in a way, they try to combine all these missions, at least at the national level, and then within the nation, there may be differences across universities. Same for the Netherlands, scores pretty high, but then not so internationalized. We think we're very internationalized, but it's not the case. Also in Erasmus, I think our students don't like to go abroad for some reason. So again, it gives you an indication of how the research system is organized at the national level. So summary of my results. So we can explain at the institutional level citation impact pretty well. And if we go down to specific disciplines, which I want to do later on, it would be interesting to see for what disciplines you can explain this well and for what you can explain it less well. But it's very hard to say something sensible about university-industry relations or internationalization. The only thing that really seems to matter is that different countries have different rates of university-industry relations. Well, any historian of science could tell you without doing the number crunching. Size is a very important determinant of citation impact, and this goes into an interesting discussion whether universities should strive for mergers. So you may know in France there's a big, let's say, program going on to merge universities that are geographically closed. So I think Lyon and Saint-Etienne, for example, merged, basically to get higher in the rankings. But apart from being a very bad motivation to do such kind of mergers, if the rankings become better and become less size sensitive, that whole exercise may actually turn against itself. but it's mostly a bureaucratic exercise. The universities still remain largely independent, but then as an administration they can report higher figures. But also I was at Sussex at SPRU, which is a partner institution of Circle. And at Sussex they have the same discussion. Should we grow bigger? Because as a bigger university you have more, if you like, strategic leeways, more resources to strive for excellence. Well, I think even if there is a strong relationship, it's of course not automatic that if you're big, you climb the rankings, and if you're small, you're not climbing the rankings. And secondly, I think in the future, all the rankings will become increasingly size insensitive, and then your size will not count that much. Now, technical universities do very well. I think for me that was an eye-opener. In the Netherlands we have always the discussion, what should the technical universities do? So at first they were supposed to train the engineers. Then 20 years ago they said you should be a proper university, so do good research. So they started to do good research. And then suddenly it was all about the third mission, and you should work more with industry. So basically we're asking everything of a technical university, and then the more general comprehensive universities can do what they did for ages. And despite all those demands on technical universities, they do very well in research, but also in engagement with industry and internationalization. So I think that's an interesting observation. There are strong country differences, again, not necessarily reflecting quality differences, but also institutional differences. And no country seems to excel, if you want to use that word, in all three indicators. Well, that was also stressed by the previous speaker. So how can universities use this kind of exercise? I think for each university they should do both a quantitative but mostly a qualitative self-assessment. What kind of universities do we want to be in the future? In what kind of institutional context do we operate? Not only at the national level, but also in disciplinary levels. Or as a technical university, you're also part of an international system of technical universities. So in what institutional context do we operate, or do we want to operate? And then think about what kind of indicators are most meaningful to benchmark yourself, and what is the most meaningful group of universities that you use for your benchmarking exercise. And once you have that, done that, and there's also, I think, a kind of consensus within your own university, you can think about where do we score low and where can we improve, and from what universities in our peer group can we learn to improve on those aspects. So this was the motivation to do this exercise, to give you some of the relevant dimensions that can be taken into account to construct such a peer group. So again, if you are a technical university, please look at technical universities and not at all universities, and please look at technical universities in countries that are similar to you in some kind of structural dimension. So I leave it at this. Then there's room for questions. I hope it's useful for the discussion.
All right, thank you. As before, let's just take one or two questions, and then we move to the panel discussion, and then of course we can go much more into detail and also address more questions to Koen. Who would like to raise a short question? Charles, yes, please.
Hello. Yeah. You mentioned that Leiden only uses Web of Science data. How large a proportion of all citations in that is that, and what would happen if all citations were included, including all journals, all books, and so on?
Well, first I should say, by the way, that I did a fourth analysis also on the highest cited papers. So this was mean citation impact. People say, no, you should look at those papers, 10%, that really has most impact. But you get the same results there. Okay, Web of Science has a language bias, even though it does include other languages. And I think there are two problems then, if you are not covering all languages, if you take the language issue only. On the one hand, it may favor English-speaking people because they are better embedded in the journals and better able to write good English, etc. But on the other hand, you could say that if you're not a native speaker and you have journals available in your own language, the research that is of lesser quality you would publish in your own language, and only the research of the best quality you would send to international read English-speaking journals. So in that sense, I think we don't know if it penalizes non-English-speaking countries or actually favors it. Then if you look at other type of databases, there tends to be a very high correlation, I mean at the aggregate level, between using Scope or Scholar, all these databases. Of course, in some disciplines like humanities, it's not a good system at all, and Web of Science recognizes this, and they have a different publication culture altogether because they publish in books and that kind of things. But for other sciences, I think it's a pretty good indication of the impact of your work.
So I have a technical question.
Yeah.
You said in the beginning that you use field normalized citation data.
Yeah.
So how come then that you see a difference between technical universities and medical school? Because shouldn't that be sort of normalized out?
Yeah, good question. The technical universities, they are defined at the institutional level and not at the field level. So there's not a field technical sciences and a field all other sciences. And technical universities mainly publish in physics and engineering. That's one of the 6 categories in Leiden. And within that category, they are treated as any other universities publishing in that discipline. So it makes it even more surprising they do so well.
Okay. I think it's now time. Well, thanks, Koen, of course, for your first contribution. And I would like now to move on to the panel discussion. We have 3 excellent panelists, and if it's okay for you, I would like to invite you to come and sit here in front of this table. Let me first introduce the 3 of them. We have Peter Honeth, who just came in, Secretary of State of the Department of Education and Research, and of course has a great responsibility in Sweden in terms of higher education and research. So we are very pleased to have him around and that he can participate. In fact, and also when looking through his CV, I found out, I didn't know, that you have been research director at Lund University for quite a long time.
University director, yeah.
Yes, that's right. So welcome back to Lund University. And then our second panelist is Sven Stafström. He's the General Director and Head of the Swedish Research Council since only a few months, right? So we are very pleased and honored that you're around. And he's also a professor in computational physics at the University of Linköping. So we are also very pleased to have you around. And then our third panelist is a colleague of us at Circle of Lund University, is Olof Ejermo, and he's Associate Professor in Economics of Innovation. And he has done a lot of research on universities, but especially on inventors in particular. So we are also very pleased to have him around and to contribute to this panel discussion. Now, before I ask them to contribute, I gave them a kind of assignment, and that was, please could you just talk for no more than 10 minutes about this topic of university rankings, whether they make sense, and maybe if not, why. This very much relate to the two previous presentations. So I first would like to give the floor to Peter Honeth and start the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. The issue of rankings is, of course, quite interesting, not least for a politician. The general question is, do they make sense? And that depends on what kind of sense. I mean, I would say that they probably doesn't make much sense in actually saying too much about the quality as such of a university or a research field or a faculty or whatever. They do make some sense, but it very much depends on what are the actual factors that you include in the ranking. They certainly make sense from a political point of view. The political logic is slightly different from the logic of the universities. I can say that I notice that almost every day, that the logics of the university and of the political level is some problems meeting, you could say. But it certainly makes sense from a political point of view. It's a strong impact, really, much stronger than they deserve. If I may take an example, I don't know if you remember, but a few months ago it was published, I think it was one of the aspects of the Times Higher ranking, where it was, I know you know that one part of that is asking quite a number of people around the world, how do they rank or the impact, or how they value rather universities all over the world. And not one of the Swedish universities was doing well according to the public opinion. And it was extremely strong. It really went right through all the papers and media. And almost everyone that I met said, oh, it's a problem that the Swedish universities are so much worse now. They're not good at all. You could see that. So it is strong from a political point of view, and you have to recognize that. But if you really look on what do they stand for, I'm very hesitant, really. I don't think that they say very much. Firstly, regardless more or less on what of the different rankings, I mean, we have the Leiden, of course, we have the Times Higher, we have the Shanghai ranking, to mention the three that are usually mostly mentioned. It's obvious that US universities and English-speaking universities are to a large extent among the top 50 or something like that, top 100 perhaps, but especially among, let's say, the top 50. And I know a bit of some of those universities, and I know a bit of some of the Swedish universities, of course, but also other universities in non-English countries. And I would certainly say that there is a bias. That means that universities in English-speaking countries, native English-speaking universities, are doing a bit better than I would say really represents some kind of a true value. And of course, it's not so strange, really. If you take, what is it, a couple of thousand researchers or academics around the world, a large proportion of those would be English speaking. And if you ask English speaking academics, what are the universities that you value? Of course they mentioned university that they have close to them, or that they cooperate more closely with. And that tends to be English or English-speaking universities to a large extent. So, and also as we heard, I mean, the big international journals, they are themselves English-speaking almost exclusively. And that also tends to be biased to the English-speaking universities. I would say that there are, if I would value, I would say that if you compare Lund University, for example, to US universities, there certainly are some, 10, 15 US universities that I probably would value higher than Lund University, but not 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 that the ranking systems tends to show. And you could go through another universities in other countries like on the same level. So I'm very hesitant what they really show. The only really factor that I would say is undisputable is of course citations. Because citations are relatively thought through. You know what citation stands for. It's not without problems. Also citations, of course, have their problems, as we have seen in the debates on the system for citations. But they are saying something. Everything else is much more difficult. And I certainly would say that if you ask general questions to academics around the world, what are the universities that you value, that is of relatively low value. It's also a question on how you use, of course, the rankings. As I said, from a political point of view, you can't disregard them. They are there, and they have a strong impact in media and through that on the political level. So you have to live with them. And that, of course, makes it very desirable to develop them to be as good as possible without ever being as good as really saying what the actual quality is. But it is important that you try to develop it. I think that the Leiden system is interesting because the aspects that you use are at least trying to be more really saying something about some kinds of quality. Both the Times Higher and the Shanghai ranking, there are, of course, they also involved citations. There are other aspects that are relatively interesting, but there are also aspects in those rankings that I would completely disregard. If you take, for example, the number of Nobel laureates, let's say, 30, 40, 50 years ago, it doesn't say anything at all, just to mention one thing from the Shanghai ranking. So, but what they can be used for, as I see it, is, of course, from a government perspective, it's interesting to look at, it highlights, for example, through citations, the relative quality, at least measured that way, among the universities in Sweden and among universities that are in countries that are relatively similar to Sweden. That, of course, is interesting. And it should be interesting what has, as far as I know, not been used very much. And that is, of course, to see how does a university develop over time? It tends to be that everyone looks at them at the rankings here and now. Our position is that, but possibly that last time, what 3 years ago or 2 years ago or whatever the interval is, it was that. But are the actual values, the citation values, for example, that is included in the ranking, how has that developed? That, of course, is interesting. The big problem, of course, is as you can, at least to some extent, measure quality of research through citations, especially. It's almost impossible if you try to kind of measure what is the quality of education in a university, because you don't have the instrument for that. And all the instruments that I have seen used by especially then the Times Higher and Shanghai ranking are not saying, not very much at least. I could almost say that it doesn't say anything at all, but it doesn't say very much, and it certainly doesn't say what the actual quality of education in those universities are. And that is probably the biggest problem with rankings, that they can say something about quality of research. They can't say anything, I would dare to say, they can't say anything about quality of education. And that means leaving out half of the university's task, and that certainly is a problem.
Just one question for you is, you said you could think of a potential impact of rankings on policy. Could you give one concrete example that it had an impact in your department?
No, it doesn't really. It has an impact on the political discussion.
Okay.
That it has, and that in a way how it affects the ministry is rather putting us in a defending position. I would certainly hesitate of using them for the actual policy. I mean, we have introduced distributing resources for research between the Swedish universities, and that, of course, but we doesn't use the rankings. We look at citations and external funding, and in the future it might be that we will change that system, and that, of course, is something that Vetenskapsrådet now is working with. But that we can do, but I wouldn't use rankings at all for policy, except that I have to defend why Swedish universities are not that bad, even though some universities would lose positions going from 60, 70 to 100 or 110. That in the media debates is seen as a big problem, but that can't be used for policy.
All right, thank you so far. Then I would like to go to the next panelist, Sven Stafström. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Actually, I made my notes on the train here in the form of PowerPoint. Do you want me to show it, or I can just...
yeah, please, if you want. Yes, of course.
I'm trained as an engineer, so we like very much PowerPoints. If this works. So I think what I will say is overlaps to a large extent what the previous speakers have mentioned. Let me first just introduce the Swedish Research Council. So our main task is to finance research of highest scientific quality in all areas of science. And we also have now a task to assess research at Swedish universities and use that assessment to maybe as a model to redistribution of the block grants. So that I think connects very much to the ranking list in terms of that the amount of redistribution, that is a single number for each university. Let me just also mention that we have an overall responsibility for research infrastructure. We initiate and support research in strategic areas. We are an advisor to the government in research policy issues. We also act very much internationally, and we work with research communication. The university rankings, I'm slightly more positive, I think, than Peter Honeth maybe is. I think that they exist because there is a demand for them. So, and the interest is growing, and I think we will see more and more of these lists coming out. I think this is a problem because I like competition, but if there are too many lists coming out, it will be just confusion for all of us. So some convergence into fewer of them I would like to see. We know that there are questions about quality and positive and negative incentives in this list, and that is something perhaps we should discuss more in the next session. What I can hope is that discussions of this kind lead to better understanding and possibly also improvements of the ranking list. There is, I read from a Hefke report, measure what counts instead of counting what is measured, and I think summarize that issue. Who are the ranking lists aimed for? I think the main target is students. And then again, what has been mentioned before is that there is very little information for the students, actual teaching quality of the universities in this ranking list. So that is kind of a contradiction. And if they should be used for students, I think that there is a lot of room for improvement. They are used for stakeholders, general public, university management. I put question marks for researchers. I don't think researchers care too much about this. Researchers normally know quite well about where is the best computational physics in the world, or where is the best chemistry. We don't need this ranking list to find it out. And especially since a lot of information is compiled into very few numbers, it's really hard to find that information. I think with this multi-rank system, it might be improve the situation, but nevertheless, researchers know citation indices, and we can look up people much easier than into this ranking list. Funding organization, also question marks at the Research Council. We don't care too much about them in relation to funding, of course, in relation to the sort of general understanding of the research level in Sweden. We have, I think, the same view as Peter Honeth mentioned, that we care to some extent about them. What do or don't they measure? As I said before, they are focused on research. Teaching quality is measured usually by proxies, indirect indicators, and I don't think they work very well. They also, most of them, limited to elite universities. One should consider that. Again, they are largely based on what can be measured rather than what is relevant and important. Bibliometric data are central to all these global ranking lists if we compare different countries. And there, of course, the problem is that some areas, for instance, medicine and natural sciences, are well represented, but for humanities, and I put here engineering sciences, even though we heard that is maybe not the case, but at least humanities is less well represented in this bibliometric data. Bibliometric data, we should know, are biased towards older publications. When peer review is used, it's mostly in service about reputation of these universities. Again, in relation to what we are working on now at the Research Council, peer review-based assessment of the science in Sweden is a completely different type of work. Of course, much more demanding, and I don't think one can do that at the global level, but at the national level, I think that's a very good way of looking at the quality of the universities. So there is a demand for indicators that treat all areas of science equally. The division into research areas is important. We want to know Who is the best in physics? Who is the best in chemistry, in humanities, etc. One question that we have dealt with in our system is how to account for research training. Suppose university has a certain amount of money, should they put them into to hire PhD students or postdocs? And maybe in the level of the ranking list, this is not so important, but I would like to mention that here as well as publications in open access journals. That's something that we are thinking about, how one should treat that when it comes to our new model. Because we want scientists to publish in open access journals, but that might affect scores in a negative way. So how to deal with that? There are some references there. The Berlin Principles of Ranking of Higher Education Institutions, I think is very good to go through. And I also read this Global University Rankings and their impact. I think it's a very good reference. And I think I have one more slide here. How should the ranking be interpreted? We should know we can use it as a first selection of top universities. Different indicators combined to one score, usually a proportion between the score of the university in question and the university that has the greatest score. So if you just look at the number, it could be completely misleading, as I think was mentioned also earlier here today. Look at profiles. I think this U-Multirank is very nice in that sense that single indicator is not so useful, but if you know, if you have a profile, and in our system that we are developing now, there will also be a profile. We divide the areas of science into 24 different categories. So if one would like to understand a single number, of course one has to understand this weighting of the individual indicators. But I don't think it's fair to say that one can obtain almost any result by changing the weighting. But it has a large effect. There is some bias, regional and language bias that one has to think about. Yes, this is intended for the next session. So I stop there.
All right, thanks very much already. Just one question for you. There's a lot of talking on research and teaching and the quality of research and quality of teaching, and that should be reflected in university rankings. But how about the third mission, and how is the Swedish Research Council coping with that? Because it is quite a demanding task, how to measure that, and actually, even if you do it at the national level, it might already quite problematic because it means a lot of resources that you have to invest in order to do that, let alone decide about what type of indicators you would like to develop. So is there any development going on there at the Swedish Research Council?
Certainly, in this new model that we are developing, we have three, let's say, criteria. One is scientific excellence, one is development of excellence, and the third one is impact outside academia. And we put a weight of 15% on that third category. And what we will do there is to use also peer reviews. So we will have a panel that assess within for a certain area of science, assess the performance of the different universities in that respect.
And peers are peers from the universities, or
stakeholders
at large?
Stakeholders, yeah,
okay.
to a large extent stakeholders. But it's peer review based, it will be.
Right.
Of course, at Vinnova there is at the same time another model developed, and we have a lot of contact, and it might be that they merge in some common model, but that we don't know for the moment. So we are now working on our way of assessing this category.
And do you expect also that this 15% weight will increase over time, because you see a kind of tendency that one attaches more importance to the third mission?
Yeah. Well, it's hard for me to comment that. I mean, for the moment, we think that 15 is put the right weight based on the instructions we got from the government, how this should be done. And it might, of course, change in the future, but there are no plans right now.
All right. Thank you very much for the time being. Olof, please.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
Okay. Sorry.
Ah, okay. So I only have 2 slides, and my background is not really on university ranking, so I wouldn't call myself an expert on that field, even though I'm standing here. But I know something about university-industry interaction and indicators for that. So I started by asking myself who needs the rankings in the first place, and I saw the same type of setup almost here from the previous speaker. So I looked at the first category would be media logic. The rankings, they sort of create their own market in a way. You hear the numbers, and the one that was first probably creates further demand from media and so on. So it spins around like that, even though I doubt a lot of the interest that we should put into that has been mentioned before. Second group is students, and here maybe one could also add PhD students, and I think these are the most important actors that could need information. And paradoxically, as was mentioned, they get the least information in a sense. They would like to know where to get the best education. Some rankings seem to provide some of that, but it's quite limited. Also, PhD students, they are looking for the best educations, but also research. So for them, there is a need to know about the research, and they are becoming increasingly mobile across the globe, I think. So they might pick just the best PhD education, and they might be very important people to attract for universities. Then we had staff, and I had the same conclusion there, that they might be the group that least need a ranking in a way, because you know your field. And 5 and 6, you have the interaction between funders and universities. Funders, they are looking for criteria to allocate funds, and we have the teaching, we have the research, but we don't have much about the interaction with society in existing indicators. And we have universities that look for some signals from funders to know where to go and which direction to take. And I don't see much signals from, at least not the Swedish policy sphere. Where is it that universities should go? There is some tendency to talk about specialization of universities, and we are seeing some of that, but it's not that clear actually. In the best of worlds, rankings can contribute. They can contribute to improved matching, especially for students, and it can contribute to internationalization of markets for education that we might see in Europe. And Sweden, in a way, already started to be there, although not fully, but with the introduction of fees. In the worst of worlds, we have a lot of rankings that... Oh yeah, it comes up soon. Oh. Yeah, sorry. I'm talking a bit fast. Okay, yeah. In the worst of worlds, the rankings will only consume resources because they take a lot of resources to compile, and they use a lot of public or semi-public money. And individuals might pick the wrong university. Yeah, I mentioned the free missions in Swedish academia, as in most European countries: teaching, education, and interaction with society, or the third mission. And that's not, as I mentioned, not much discussed. We know that in Sweden we have a highly decentralized incentive system, so people can earn money from doing interaction, but the universities just don't get any of that. But implicitly in the rankings there is a kind of assume that universities have a lot of maneuverability. For instance, you might see measures like license income, even though the incentives are with the individuals, researchers. I looked at Vinnova's suggestion for allocating funds based on interaction, and here it's based on the possibility that the idea is that universities should formulate their strategies. I think there is a risk that that is a less transparent process. And I think one should complement that with indicators. And I have a few suggestions. I think existing data that we have could greatly complement what we can compile in terms of literature or citation indicators. I mean, we have extremely good data in this country on things like students or if you want to look at some high-tech firms or something like that. You can also measure the share that are employed, say 2 years after graduation, or unemployment rates from particular universities. And you can look at income development as a measure of performance of how good their education is in a way. I mean, money isn't everything, but it's actually good for Swedish society if they earn money and pay taxes. So policymakers should be interested in that. And the second category is staff, which I have looked a bit at. We can see the rate at which individual staff at universities start up firms. There are very few, so maybe this category is not that great. We can see inventors, which I spent a lot of time on working on, which universities have the most inventors. And I have published this in Ekonomisk Debatt, and Per Eriksson knows some of that work. And Lund University has the highest share of inventors, by the way. Board members, if staff are involved in different firms, if they are presidents or CEOs. And remember, these are full data. We know for all of individuals, so there is no sampling problem whatsoever. We can also see if they earn regular income and in private firms, if they have a part-time activity, or if they have business income. And now I spent like a day compiling the net income of university staff from businesses, and this was the result. So the indicator here was share of staff with any business income, average 2008 to 2012. Now you might say, why did I choose this? Well, business income is a very tricky variable. A lot of people run negative surpluses because they want to be able to deduct things like a computer or something like that. But so a negative amount actually means they are active, so they should be counted as such. A plus is also a factor of indicating activity. And when I did that, I found out that the rate was not extremely varying for the majority of universities. We have a lower group, in a sense, in that indicator. Actually, Karolinska is in that group, a bit surprising. Some of the technical universities, and a big group, and this group has about 8 to 13% of their staff with any type of business income. And this mid group has 14 to 18% of the staff have any business income. And the top university, clearly highest ranked, is Stockholm School of Economics. And they teach entrepreneurship, so apparently they are doing something which they also teach their students. Now, some of these places, I think, are much more active. So they might be inventors, they might be in boards, and so on. So this obviously needs complementing with other indicators. So this just points to the possibility to use register data for that purpose. Okay.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, we have 20 minutes. Of course, I would also like to involve the audience if you have any questions, but maybe Pontus, yes.
I have a question, but you were going to say something more.
Well, you start.
Okay, thank you. Peter, you mentioned that these rankings, they are actually useless when it comes to policy purposes. But on the other hand, from a political point of view, they might be highly interesting. Imagine if we had 2 universities at the top 20 or something like that, then they would be of political interest, of course. But the question is, I come to think of another ranking, namely PISA. It's about the same, has the same background in terms of years, around 2000 and so on. And that has been used in several ways, perhaps not exactly to design policies, but as a warning signal that something is going on. I think you hinted at that also. You have a static and you have a dynamic evolution here, and the latter may be the more important. And in that way, it could be a useful political instrument, perhaps. What is your view on that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I'm not against measuring, or at least trying to measure quality. That is important. It's important on the national level, and it is or could be important also on the international level. And PISA is important, and it does say not everything, perhaps, but it says a lot. But the problem is with rankings that all the rankings I know involve a number of issues based on indicators that, at least my view is, that the indicators doesn't say very much. I mean, the only indicator that I certainly recognize is of value is the using citations as an indicator. Citations, it's not without problems, as everyone knows. It has been pointed out already here that, for example, humanities have problems with that. But nevertheless, that is interesting. And it is interesting to see how Swedish universities, from a policy point of view, compare when it comes to citations. And that is something that we look at. We are looking with some envy, for example, how the Danish universities has improved over a number of years on that. But that is only one of the indicators. The rest of the indicators that are used in rankings say very much less, or in many cases, according to my view, doesn't say anything at all. And that's why you have to be very careful and hesitate of using them for a policy point of view. The problem with indicators is that you have to agree on what is good and what is not good. And there are relatively high level of agreement on citations that they really say something about the quality. Once again, not without problems, but nevertheless, there are a relatively general agreement that you could use citations and that it does say something, that they does say something about quality. But when you come, for example, let's take the examples that you mentioned here. I would be very hesitant of using that for example, for distributing resources, research resources, or resources for education between the universities in Sweden. Because there, firstly, we have to agree that one or the other of what you showed here, what is good and what is not good. And secondly, what we are after are results in terms of quality, or quality in terms of results, perhaps is better to phrase it. And a lot of the indicators measures activity instead of actually measuring results. And that is the problem of using indicators for the third mission. And that and we can see that from the proposal that Vinnova are working with, that a lot of the indicators, and they have gone through quite a list of indicators, many of them, most of them I would even say, tends to measure activity and not measuring the actual results that could be the token of the quality that we are after. And therefore I think that it's, once again, not a system without problems, but it's a better system of using peer review. Because, I mean, universities could work in many different ways with the third mission. And what is good and what is not good is not easy to define. It's better to use peer reviews for that. It's very difficult to try to catch that through indicators.
Right.
Long answer. Sorry.
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, Peter, but I'm not as positive as you regarding citation index, as long as the citations are not divided in negative and positive citations. Because if a researcher is publishing only bad results, he will always generate a lot of responses because his colleagues want to tell to the scientific community that he is wrong. And these facts are used professionally by some of our colleagues. One of my colleagues, he told me, he said, you see, every time when I have to update my citation index, I'm publishing something which is completely nonsense. And then I'm up in the top. Thank you.
Okay. Well, as I said, citations are not without problems, and there are certainly problems with that, but still, it's more or less general agreement that citations could nevertheless be used. I mean, there are other problems. We have seen the development of longer and longer lists of authors, for example. That is, of course, also a problem. But and now you try to counter that by only counting for the first name, for example, and so on. So all indicators are connected to problems. But nevertheless, the problems are not quite as big with citations as an indicator as with some of the other indicators that have been used.
Please, Sven.
Going back to this quality of teaching, which I think is important to measure, and I would like to include Don in the discussion because you brought it up in your presentation. So how is your view of the way you measure quality of teaching? How accurate could it be, those measurements you mentioned?
We're including information on what we hope indicates quality of education in a couple of ways. In U-Multirank we have some objective data about the time to degree for students and the graduation rates, so how good are institutions taking care of their students, making sure that they get to their degrees. We also we try to include originally some information on employment, but internationally that's completely incomparable because of different economic situations, etc. So that has been dropped, I'm afraid. And then we have the subjective data on the field level of the satisfaction of current students. Yeah, there are different aspects of quality of education. I wouldn't say it's a total quality picture, of course. But within the limitations that we have in this international system of trying to limit the number of indicators, because you can't just measure everything, and try to find information which is broadly comparable across countries, I thought that this is the type of information that was the best we could do. And certainly I think we're trying to improve on what the other rankings were doing in terms of education.
Yes, I would like to bring up another topic that's about the distribution of quality in a country. So I think the whole ranking discourse is part of excellence discourse, and of course one could strive to improve excellence of all Swedish or Dutch universities, but probably that you can only improve some of those universities, and that comes at the cost of less resources to other universities. So the real political question, at least in the Netherlands now, is: are we going to change our system of equal allocation of money to one that is very selective? And my view is that it would be probably it would also be not in economic interest, let alone in the students' interest, to lower the quality of most universities and just to have one or two of those top. And if you look at the US and you look at the Leiden ranking this year, that includes more than 500 universities, but 750. almost all those universities from 500 to 750 are either from Asia or the US, and no European university. So we have a flat landscape with good universities, and that comes at the expense of not being among the top. But that's a political question.
Yes, please, Peter.
Well, we're getting close to a very big issue, of course, that of general policy. But let me just say that what the government has done in Sweden is really increasing the distribution of university funding for research based on, as I said, the indicators. I think that is extremely important, because if you just distribute resources evenly between that means that because we don't have unlimited resources, and that tends to lead to that everyone is underfinanced, or at least not financed that makes it possible to perform on a very high international level. And that, as I see it, is a problem for a country without having some universities at least that could perform. Whether it's best on the rankings or not is not that important, but it should measure up to high level on a higher international level. And in order to reach that, you have to distribute resources unevenly. And secondly, I think it is important because that is one way of trying to foster within the universities in Sweden a general feeling that you must strive for highest possible quality. And the problem in Sweden, I would say, is not that we don't have some or quite a lot of very good research, but that we have too much of not very good research in Sweden. And it's okay, I usually say, it seemed to be okay in a Swedish university of not being very good as an individual researcher. And that could not be accepted. You have to, not everyone can be at the absolute international top level, of course, but you have to be relatively good if you are supposed to work in a good university. And that is one way of fostering that feeling through the incentive of the distribution of research resources. So there are a number of reasons why we use that. Once again, I fully agree with Herman that using indicators like citations, and even more perhaps even an indicator that measures how much external funding you get, because not all external funding comes from Vetenskapsrådet, it's problematic. That's why I really see that we should move in the direction of using more of peer reviews, which is not, once again, without problems either, but it's a better system than using indicators.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Elisabeth Hammarberg, and I work with ranking analysis here at Lund University. And Peter, you mentioned before that you didn't think you'd seen so much about comparing years from years between the different rankings, and I can tell you that here we look quite much at that. That's very interesting for us to see if we develop in which way and which indicators are improving and not improving. But there are also difficulties with that, especially the fact that even though we might be improving in our own indicator, we might fall on the ranking because other universities are improving more. We're not running fast enough. The second difficulty is, and that I think that's true for most Swedish universities, we are in a segment where there are very many universities in the same segment, lower 60 to 100 and lower. And also very, very small changes can mean a very large improvement or drop in rank. Happened to Uppsala universities 2 years ago and to Lund universities 1 year ago in Times Higher Education. So even if we look on the fluctuations of the rankings, we do see problems.
Yeah.
Two short statements or questions. Don, first, what you mentioned here, I think that highlights the difficulties with measuring quality in such an important part of university life as education. Is graduation rate capturing quality or quantity, for instance? And the other thing to Olof, if you have 25% of staff involved in different business activities, wouldn't you get a little bit worried about whether they're fulfilling their tasks as teachers and researchers in that case, or is that really a good indicator?
Can I? Yeah, my suggestion about indicators was not to use necessarily that particular one, but a battery of indicators. And the second reflection I have is that the questions that are raised against them is somewhat similar to the use of citations, because you have to field normalize and so on, because you have a different citation rate. Now, if you are active as in technical research, you probably have much more possibilities to start a firm, and you can do that. And it should be done, of course. Now, not using any other indicator than citation, I think that is quite problematic as well. I think I mean, a lot of research shows that researchers, even on individual levels that are active in commercialization, they become better researchers as well. So there is not a huge amount of that, but there is some emerging evidence on that. So even if you measure the same person over time, they become better researchers. We have to dig deeper into that, and we're going that because we are collecting on the individual level at Circle all publications of staff 10 years back in time to look at that, which is a huge task. Now, I hope that some policymakers is interested in our results in the end. Otherwise, we can just, stop. Okay.
Please, Don.
Could I add some short retortion to your remarks? Graduation rate, is it an indicator of quality? We interpret it in this way that at the moment that a university has allowed students to get in, they have the obligation to take care of their students. And you don't just drop them out and say, oh, thanks for coming in, thanks for bringing in the money, and now you go again. That was why we thought of other indicators, such as, at the same time, what's about their employment. In international context, that didn't work, so all we were left with was the basic decision that you're only allowed into our ranking if you have an accreditation, which is supposed to give some kind of a minimum level of quality per country. Yeah, that's the usual logic. That's where you have to start. And in reaction to the question of indicators as such, and perhaps reacting to Peter here, an indicator just means a pointer. We're pointing towards something. You don't reach it exactly. And I think that gives the role in further decision-making of indicators. They're the evidence on which decisions should be based. Evidence-based decision-making, if you can. So you don't want peers to be using their fantasy to make decisions, but they want it to base on some information. But it's only getting you this far, and indeed, for a more holistic decision, you need human intellect.
Yes, please.
Well, once again, the question of indicators. I would say that what we are striving to catch is what is the actual quality, whether it's research or education or the third mission or whatever. We're trying to catch what is high quality, good quality. And I would say that there are two definite prerequisites in order to use indicators. The first is that you should use indicators that measure results, because that is really what we want. Is the result showing good quality? And that's why I'm rather hesitant to indicators that tends to measure activity. And a lot of indicators that are discussed and even used tend to measure activity, because often that is easier to define indicators that measure activity than actually measuring results. And the second prerequisite is, of course, that there has to be some agreement, at least, not general perhaps, but some agreement on what is good quality, what is desirable results. And that is not without problems, once again, but easier when it comes to research. It's much more difficult when it comes to education to meet these two prerequisites. And it's even more difficult when it comes to the third mission. And that's why I tend to land, at least on the national level, that it's probably better trying to use a peer review-based system where there are individuals actually looking at, has this, whatever it is, department or university or faculty, really produced results that are of high quality in their third mission task. Once again, that is also difficult, but it's better than at least not only using indicators.
But also peers need criteria, and that's something one has to develop. And of course, when we in our normal way as the Research Council evaluate proposals, applications, we have a number of criteria defined that we give to the peers to use in their assessment. And in the model that we are developing, it will be the same, that we will set up a number of criteria for each of these three main criteria that the peers should base their assessment on. And they are really critical, I would say, these criteria that we set up.
But I guess that in applications, the criteria novelty of research is highly important. Yeah. Well, I don't see them so much in the rankings we discussed so far, right? So this makes, I think, your point that peer review can only, let's say, cover. Of course, there are some relationships with numbers of citations, but you might also say that that citations will only follow at, after a considerable delay. So you won't immediately identify that while using citation data. So in that sense, I think novelty, because that is what science to me is about, is still poorly covered in that respect, and peer review could really contribute to that. And therefore, you might even say that going for external funds, in fact, that is probably the most important criterion that is used, whether a grant will be awarded or not, might be even a good thing to develop further.
With peers, you have the possibility at least to use a much wider range of criteria.
Exactly.
Of course, one has to be selective, but it's a possibility.
Can I?
Yes, Olof?
I mean, if we say that we measure results, then research is not, I would say it's not results. It's something that might be used to get innovation or business or production, something further on. And furthermore, if we look at publication, we know that it's an extremely skewed distribution. We have what's called the Lotka scientific distribution. The vast majority of work is never cited at all. So then you might be inclined to say that this research is actually useless. But you need this tail. You must have both the extremely excellent and the not so excellent, and the not so excellent sometimes produce an excellent researcher. So I think we need different types of researchers. Some produce research, they are excellent at that, and some produce innovations or production or new firms, and this contributes to the variety of academia, which I think is very important, and that we try to capture some of that variety in different indicators, and that sends the signal to academia that you're doing something valuable, just not only research.
Okay, I think we should leave it to that because I think we're all longing for a break. Of course, we will continue with the program at 4. Of course, I will not make preliminary conclusions from the first part of the workshop, but I think the quality was pretty high, and we had doubts about the quality of university rankings, but and those should definitely be improved. But I hope we can at least, if we could keep the same level of quality of discussion after the break, I would be extremely grateful. Thanks a lot for the panelists, and also Peter Honeth has to leave, unfortunately, after this discussion. So thank you very much, Peter Honeth, for contributing. I was very grateful for that. And okay, I'll see you all at 4 when we continue. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that was a very interesting first part of this conference, and thanks, Ron, for moderating that so excellent. Makes life harder for me because now we're going to be ranked, the two of us, but we'll cope with that. So this session deals with the more practical issues, so to speak. What do university rankings mean for students, for universities, for scientists, more in practical terms? And we will start with 2 presentations from 2 individuals that should be highly involved in exactly this. And it's the chancellor here at Lund's University, Per Eriksson, and it's the vice chancellor at Uppsala University and professor in economic geography, Anders Malmberg. And the order is that Anders will start, and then Per will take over. So please, Anders, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Pontus. Well, Per is the vice chancellor. I'm the deputy vice chancellor in the terminology used there, or the pro-rector,
you're right,
vice president,
right.
whatever. Yeah, it gets harder for everybody, Pontus, here to say something new and original as the afternoon proceeds. But we were asked to talk about what do rankings mean in practice for, I think it was like researchers, students, and universities. And I, after thinking about it, I figured out that maybe the university management perspective would be the most natural for me to take on this. And then I will have to skip through, I think, quite a few of my slides because so much have already been said. But just to remind ourselves, there are only a tiny little fraction of all the universities in the world that we ever see in these league tables. So that's an important starting point. And whether you like it or not, of course, it's important for a university with ambitions to be a world-leading university, to be on those lists in order to be attractive for international students, as we want to be, and as partner universities for other good universities in the world, of course. I also think we should kind of admit that these ranking lists are there, as somebody said, because they feel a need, and I think they partly feel a need in absence of other accurate information, for example, on teaching and on on our offerings to students or our offerings to society. So it's partly because we do lots of nice marketing material, but actually we don't produce really systematic information on our activities that could be used. And then, of course, that lacuna of information gets more important with increasing distance. I think Swedish students know fairly well that Lund might be somewhat different than Kristianstad, but it's much more difficult to know that if you start in China, and then you of course go to the ranking lists. As Peter Honeth was talking about, they're also obviously used for political purposes in all kinds of ways, both internally within universities and externally. That's also a starting point. They are a not so unimportant feel-good or feel-bad factor, I would say, for university management. Of course, it's easier to go to work on a day when a favorable ranking has been published than the other way around. Say a bit more about that. You can run, but you cannot hide, like him or not, but there is no escape. Peter actually mentioned this Times Higher Education World Reputation Ranking. That was published in March, which was actually a bit of a traumatic experience to some of us. All of a sudden, there was a fantastic media focus on this particular ranking, which is actually one of the more strange ones to comment upon or discuss or say anything about.
the Times Higher Education Supplement also send one of their top hitmen to Sweden, I think, to really hammer the message in that Swedes are losing out. I think it's because they want us to kind of buy into the next version or something. But anyway, the big news was that Lund and Uppsala had slipped outside the top 100. And I think that was also kind of it fitted well into a political context in that particular. There was like a PISA panic for higher education for a couple of days or weeks there, which was quite interesting. In Uppsala, the Faculty of Science and Technology, which is our biggest faculty organized a special session called by one of the leading professors to discuss this trend of negative trend of Swedish universities and Uppsala in particular on the rankings, which is interesting. And this, Peter said everybody slipped out. Karolinska Institute actually came out pretty well in that one. The method in that particular ranking, and Peter Honeth said something, I just want to qualify that a bit. A number of selection of professors are invited and asked to name universities which they think are world leading in their own field. Not in general, but in their own field. So if I would be asked as an economic geographer, I would be asked which are the best economic geography universities in the world, and I would name the 5 or 10 that I know best, which is in a sense interesting. Quite a lot of people, decreasing number though, fewer than before, but very few details are disclosed on the response rates and the distribution across countries and fields of these. So it's actually completely impossible to know what this result, what a slide on this list represents. It's also very odd actually to have a reputation-based ranking, because rankings more than anything else form reputation. So it becomes like you get into a very dangerous loop when you start doing lists like this. You end up in a full circle, if you could say like that on a seminar like this. And it's really impossible to know whether it represents any real change or just methodology. Some smart head in our analysis unit looked at the numbers and the few ones that are disclosed, and you can actually calculate roughly how many votes that were missing to put the university like Lund or Uppsala on that list, and it could have been something like 15, so that's quite interesting. But anyway, of course, you can't shy away from this. It is, whether they are worth anything or not, you have to relate to them. And of course, we follow our positions in these rankings very carefully. This is Uppsala's development in the 3 most global ones that we follow carefully. Currently, we're 60, 79, and 111. And if you look at those, and then it's the years going backwards, so 73 last year, the year before, etc. And if you look at this, of course, you can see that some you come out in a more favorable way in some rankings than in others, but the overall pattern, I would say, is that it's relatively stable, with the exception of the Times Higher Education, which was a bit bumpy, 147, 87, 106. And of course, the fact that there are a number of Swedish universities with stable positions in this level of the league is interesting, but stability never receives media attention. It's always that. I won't talk about types of rankings. There has been clever things said about this already. Also, general weaknesses of the rankings have been quite well rehearsed here today. I'll see if there is any point that hasn't been emphasized. No, I think all of that has been pretty well covered. I agree with the previous speakers on these problems. Then from a managerial point of view, is it important to try to perform better in rankings? Should we play the ranking game? Should we start to run our universities in such a way that we think that we can improve our position on the ranking? This is an interesting question. Helsinki University has as one of their public objectives to get on the top 50 list. That's the only Nordic university I know who said something like that. Pontus, you indicated, wouldn't it be nice to have a few Swedish universities on the top 20? Yeah, maybe it would. Maybe it would. Maybe it would. Yeah,
but it would have more of a political interest in that case. Perhaps the government would talk about it a little bit more.
Kåre Bremer has been the former rector at Stockholm University. He has been proposing several times that Stockholm University should merge with Karolinska Institute and the Royal Institute of Technology. And then he has said, only based on indicators, such a constellation would actually rank number 3 in Europe, which is interesting. But then you can always also reply,
as somebody did, then it means we already have a like top 3 in Europe research structure in Stockholm, but distributed in 3 universities. So is the fact that, is the ranking then important or not? That's an interesting issue. But I mean, some things that would make us perform better on the rankings are of course easy to see. Publish more papers in well-cited journals or in good journals, fine. Having faculty receiving awards is nice, but it's not so easy to kind of manage. Increased share of external research funding, fine. High share of commissioned research, high research to education ratio, that's a bit more problematic. I'll come back to this. These are more things you could try to do if you want to climb the rankings, as someone put it here. And I'll come back to this in a minute. To the degree that Uppsala University has a ranking policy, we say that, and I think Per will agree, I mean, we will enter game playing only insofar as it improves quality and is compatible with the overall strategies and goals of the university. And we can't do it uncritically. Also, we regularly review the ranking field and actively try to influence the ranking systems. That's also something you have to do. We try to deliver correct data to selected lists that we collaborate with. And then, of course, we also use ranking position in branding and marketing, but we try to do it in a thoughtful and conservative way, in a sense. We never put emphasis on small changes in the rankings, but we say we're happy when we are there among the top 100 because that's where we want to be. We also try to give proper information on rankings internally and externally, as I said, and to provide nuance information. That's also said already. And then, of course, we analyze how specific indicators develop over time carefully, as was witnessed here from Lund as well. And then we try to benchmark with comparable universities. I mean, that's the way we kind of try to do it. And then, just to round up this brief intervention, these are kind of specific policies and measures that could come up in the context of ranking. And I've made them green, yellow, and red here to indicate that some are really quite unproblematic, some are more doubtful, and some are not good at all. I think all this will improve rankings more or less, roughly speaking. Incentives for publishing well, no problem. International co-publication, no problem. International marketing generally, no problem, important to do when it comes to students. Incentives for getting external research funding, fine. Those are quite unproblematic. This is what we do all the time. Recruit highly cited researchers, yes, fine, but not really as a, I mean, we should recruit good researchers, and then if they happen to end up on some highly cited list like Ron Boschma, that's good for Lund, but that wasn't really the main reason for hiring him. Only hire teaching and research staff with doctorate degrees. Yes, that's basically good, but sometimes we actually also need to have other specialists as teachers in some of our programs. And should we not then do that because it will make us look worse in the ranking? Well, that's a problem. Get more students to formally pass or register their exams. That was discussed already before. Generally, of course, it's good if our students finalize their studies, but we should never start to fiddle with quality. And also we should accept the fact that in a lifelong learning society, not every student is in for a full degree. Some people are here just to take individual courses, and that should also be fine. Then when we go into the red, I think it's much more problematic. I mean, some of the rankings are constructed such that the more you focus on science, medicine, and technology as in relation to the social sciences and humanities, the better. I don't think you could ever let rankings affect that kind of decision. There could be other reasons to do this, but never ranking. Some rankings are even designed such that you should perhaps have disincentives for publishing little cited paper. I think this was dealt with in a previous session. That's also not really reasonable. Some universities reclassify research staff as teaching staff in order to increase the teacher-to-student ratio. That's also a strange thing to start doing for ranking reasons. Reduce number of students to become more research intensive. I don't think that's something we want to do. And also reduce less immediately job market oriented education is also something you could be tempted to do, and I don't think that should either be a result. So, I mean, so ranking games, look at rankings, well, to a degree, but be really skeptical to run for it fully. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anders. One question. I mean, all of these things that you put up there, I think most people can agree with it.
Yeah.
Well, but how specific are you? Is it you should publish in Web of Science journals? You have strategic cooperation with certain universities because you know that working with them means that the researcher will get contacts and publish in highly cited journals, or do you leave it at this general level?
Well, that's a very specific question. When it comes to incentives of publishing, I think we use Web of Science in most of our indicator-based models, but also in some cases we use the so-called Norwegian model, where you also get points for publishing books with good English publishers, for example. So I mean, and that's also something. I mean,
so it's not really universities. There are degrees of freedom in how you apply this.
Yeah. Well, you can do some things at the university level, some at the level of the faculty, and so on. It varies a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, then we go to the Vice Chancellor, Per Eriksson. Please.
This is a title that doesn't work in Asia, I can tell you. So we say President. Because they ask who's the Chancellor. Ja, just det. Precis. Kan inte ta det vägen här. Okej. Jag får inte ordning
på den. Du går på slideshow där.
Ja. Den brukar gå med F5, men det funkar. Jo, nu gick det. När du tryckte gick det. Jag tryckte 4 gånger själv. Well, let me point out that, of course, we emphasize things that go very good. And we are critical to things that are not working very well. Let me give you one other example. My Minister of Education, he loves one of the ranking, and it's not been mentioned at all, is Universitas 21 has a country ranking. It's been country. And we are in this ranking. Sweden is number 2 after US. So he always publish, and I heard him talking about that this is well reputation Universitas 21, and we are part of that, so we know them fairly well. But that's of course also about indicators. That was one thing I would like to point out. Second is that what I have during my 5.5 years at Lund University have recognized that was in the beginning I came here and I saw that we had fairly good in this ranking, and I was talking about the ranking. But the university professors and deans, they were quite reluctant. They didn't care, that doesn't matter so much. But that has changed. Because what's happened in the big world, and especially in Asia, I often say in Asia they are true believers of ranking. So we have to consider this as important with the ranking. So even if you are critical thinking, it's important. It's important for when we recruit students. But I think that we have to have, of course, a policy, a strategy for the university. But in some areas, this policy we are running for, also you can see a direct comparison to what is pointed out with some ranking. And then, of course, you can use the ranking to improve your own strategy. And our strategy is, in fact, to be a world-class university that works to understand, explain, and improve our world and human conditions. And we have 4 strategies, and I think one of the important things of this strategy is, of course, internationalization. And what we have seen so far is that we have something between 10 to 15% of our students and our faculty that are international. And of course, if that is in the line of our strategy to be more international, and then of course we use, when we are talking about we have to go more international, we also say that this will improve also our ranking. Another thing is, in fact, that we have been discussing, in fact, to have some of our researcher staff that, and that may be a different policy from Uppsala, because we have been talking about that some of our professors, some of our researchers, they are not teachers. and that means that they cannot be promoted to professors. We are thinking of maybe we should change that at the university, because we get a better policy for recruiting people to our university. So, and of course, because that is in line also. If you compare, for instance, Lund University, Copenhagen, you can see that they seem to have more of their researchers as teachers than we do. Another thing that we, of course, have learned, and also is in accordance with our strategy, is about working with our alumni. So compare also to the leading university in different type of ranking or outside ranking. You can learn quite a lot to work with a university. For instance, we had a report that Sylvia was one of the author of what could be learned from Stanford and Berkeley. And of course, we can learn a lot from them. We can learn to be better on fundraising. We can learn how to get hold of our buildings. And this also communicate with donations, because a donator is quite happy to give a building. So that I have still a dialogue with my my government. It's of course a mission impossible, but I go on. I think I'm only the one only, but I think Uppsala has also some strategy, and also the former president of Stockholm University, Ejermo. We were the two ones, and now I think Eva also part of that, because I think that owning your own buildings is very important for the university to get an integrity and to be more independent, because that gives a balance sheet that are much stronger for a university, and that of course is very important. Now I will give you some of our rankings, and we are a true believer of QS, because we are scoring highest in QS. So we love that. Shanghai, we think the same as you said about Nobel laureate. Our Nobel laureate from Lund University, they have a very bad habit. They do the work here, and then they leave to other university and get the Nobel Prize. Last it was Arvid Carlsson in dopamine. He made the research here, but then he moved to Gothenburg and got the Nobel Prize. I have told my deans of faculty that now we shall do the other way around. You shall look for top scientists that are candidates for the Nobel laureate, and then you shall recruit them here, and they get the Nobel Prize to Lund University. That, of course, is not a strategy of the university, but it's a part of our humor that we have also in the values of the university. But it points out that of course, these type of indicators is not always valid. But let me point out one thing that is also, I think, quite important, and that is about, we have been working with our website, and Webometrics, of course, is measuring that. So I'm happy to see that figure, because that was one, before I came to this position as being the Vice Chancellor or President of the university, I was asking around, what do people think as a mission for the future of the university? And one I really is challenged by Mission Impossible. And one of the Mission Impossible for Lund University was if you could make a better website and strategy of the web. So I think we have been improving. But then of course it's good to look at the website. But we have also learned and experienced that we are fairly strong in geography, area studies, and also in environmental science. So here we think also this is very reliable because we are scoring high. But it really affects, as was pointed out, students, scientists, researchers. I don't think so much about scientists, because they understand in detail their own area, so they don't care so much. But nevertheless, they also care. But public and also government, as you heard. So it's like some sort of loop. So of course we like to be a university of high reputation, and then we can recruit better students, we can recruit better faculty, and so on. So, for instance, our advisory board, they said to us, you have to go up to top 50, because then you get a positive feedback. You could be sure for that. But we as a university, we like not only to be a top university, we want also to make impact around the university, as we pointed out, to improve our world and human condition. But nevertheless, looking at the students, we have, of course, are out there on Facebook and Twitter and so we get a lot of comments from students when we are ranked higher. So it's very important for also the students. So of course you know this that we have talked about. It's easy to understand in some sense because it's only one of a number of figures. But and media go very strongly, and I think also it was quite a coincidence of these times higher. It came in the PISA when it was discussed, so we was a part of that also. Partly it was positive because then there was about quality of university, so but the indicator, of course, could be doubted if that was a true one. You can see, for instance, for us, we went down from, if we look at times higher, 89, 80, 82, 123, it doesn't seem so reliable. It seemed to be stable and then unstable. Well, finally, of course, looking into more detail, it is not easy to understand. And I was in one conference in Norway, and Times Higher was there, and they also said that they have a program where every university that is ranked by Time Higher, they could use a program and find the weight who is most favorable for their own university. So this is also to get some distance from the ranking system. But nevertheless, it's important for us, and we have to understand that it really have an impact on people around the university. But finally, we stick to our strategic plan from the university to be a world-class university with our own way of defining that to understand, explain and improve our world and human condition. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Per. So again, I mean, this is something that you take seriously, but it doesn't mean that your overall strategies is very much targeted towards and depending on these rankings. You carry on, so to speak, and then if your ranking go up, the better, and if you are a bit lower, well, that's life in a way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we go to get for the money and get for good recruitment, so, and that's most important. In the long time, it will pay off.
Okay. No monetary incentives for good publication and so on. There are universities who use these kinds of instruments. So you get a relatively impressive check if you publish in the top 5 or something like that.
Yeah. We have not made that. We have had some discussion, but I don't think that will really improve.
Okay. Okay, we should have mentioned this long before, that this event is filmed and it will be put on the web. So it means that we who are standing here are being recorded by that film camera, if you didn't guess that already, but I promised to tell you that. Okay, so I think to end this part, if there are any questions to either Anders or Per, raise your hand now, and then we carry on with the panel discussion. And of course, you will be free then also to pose questions to both Per and Anders. No questions now? Okay. Well, again then, thank you, Per and Anders. And let's turn to the panel discussion now. So Peter Honeth had to leave, as you may been told already, but he couldn't make it this panel session as well. But we have Sylvia Schwag-Seger, who is adjunct professor here at Lund University and also the Director of International Strategy at Vinnova. And we have Charles Edqvist, who is professor and previously head of Circle and a leading scholar in the area of innovation. Please, can you enter the scene here? And then we have Sven Stafström, who has already been introduced one, but who is the director of, I better read here now so I get the things right in English, of the Swedish Research Council. So please have a seat. Now, whether we like it or not, whether we believe it or not, but the rankings are out there and we have discussed that, and they are likely to have real effects. So, in your views, as you, Sylvia, being a little bit bridge between the outside world and the university, bringing in knowledge, but also trying to make university-generated knowledge to flow out of the university sphere. Maybe we should start with you. What is your view on these rankings and how to cope with them? And should they imply some sort of practical strategies, or should we deal with it the way we were told here by the chancellors? Sylvia.
Thank you. I think the healthy skepticism that has been voiced throughout most of the afternoon, I think, is a very important strategy to have when dealing with the rankings. But basically, I think there are three things that I just wanted to mention that I think haven't been mentioned that much today, or maybe overstate them a little bit. But the first one is, I think all afternoon we've been talking about the fact that the rankings neglect teaching and neglect impact or cooperation. And I think when you have to look at the rankings in a national context, and when you look at the rankings in a context in Sweden where we have a separation of the budget for teaching and research, and where the budget for teaching has been stagnating, and whereas the budget for research has been increasing, the rankings sort of reinforce a dangerous bias, I would say, in the Swedish system, which is sending, so already at a national level, you're saying research is perhaps more important than teaching, and that bias is being reinforced through the rankings. So you're creating an incentive structure that is triggering a dangerous spiral, I would say. And when you look at how the rankings try to measure teaching, I think what they do is either they're based on academic reputation, which academic surveys, which I think are extremely problematic in measuring teaching, or you have, for example, Nobel Prize winners or field medals winners. And I think the new ranking, the U-Multirank, is a laudable attempt to try and measure education. It's still problematic because it's really hard. But I think this is my first point, that I think the rankings actually create or exacerbate a challenge that we already have in Sweden, which you might not have to the same extent in other countries. My second point is that I think they're a little bit misleading because they create the impression that we have, as somebody said, a global market for research and education. But if you look at the Swedish university system, actually, so a very high-level person at Lund said, you know, Swedish universities at undergraduate level tend to recruit nationally or even regionally. So the majority of foreign students that come at undergraduate level, to my knowledge, are coming through exchange programs from other universities, which means they're not using the rankings to choose whether to come to Lund. So where the rankings come in is when you're recruiting international students at master's level or PhD level in Sweden. And at that level, I think it becomes much more important what the rankings say about individual disciplines. So just a short comment, I think the rankings are clearly most relevant, or who they are aimed at are students, but also what hasn't been mentioned are alumni. I think a lot of alumni like to look at the rankings to make sure that their university is doing well, and if it's doing well, it's creating a strong incentive for them to give back to the university. That's something that hasn't been as prominent in Sweden because we haven't been working as systematically with alumni. But in other countries, that makes a big, so I would say a big target group is students and alumni. But then you have the paradox that actually when it comes to students, these comprehensive rankings are not so relevant in Sweden because you're not recruiting, you're not really recruiting that internationally at the undergraduate level, since most of them come through exchange programs. My third point really is, one thing I'd also like to say, when you look at Chinese students, it's really interesting. Chinese students, their decision to study at a Swedish university, first and foremost, I would argue, comes because they want to live in Sweden. So they'll say, I want to come here because the air is clean and maybe because democracy is attractive. And then they'll go at the rankings and say, okay, which university should I pick? So you have another interesting situation where Swedish universities should probably market themselves collectively in countries such in Asia. But then you have the paradox that as soon as you convince the student that they should come to Sweden, then the competition starts and then it's a total ranking game. So that's one. My final point is about impact. I mean, there's been a lot of criticism about how you measure impact, and I would totally agree that it's extremely difficult to measure impact and also to assess cooperation. But when you have a system which is so biased towards measuring research and not at all at measuring teaching or impact, you need to do something. You can't just say it's hard to measure impact, so we won't do it. So I think that's something that's making very much too easy for yourself. And I think what Olof did was very good to come with concrete suggestions of how to measure impact. Then you have the traditional problem that you're still measuring a lot of knowledge flowing out rather than knowledge perhaps flowing in, which adjunct professors could be one. But you know, there's a little bit of, and also the Leiden statistics about industrial academia publications measure a very limited part of cooperation, since we know that a lot of fundamental cooperation with SMEs will not happen in co-publications. So those were my three. So I think there are some problematic implications with the rankings as they are today.
Thank you. Being a director of international strategy, I mean, the fact that we have very few undergrad students at our universities, would you foresee that to be the case also if we look ahead, or could we hypothesize that there will be an increase in internationalization at that level too, or will that be wiped out by all the MOOCs that may enter the game? And then it's important again with the rankings, because then you can do the MOOC with Stanford or whatever. No,
I absolutely think that there is a clear potential for increasing international undergraduate recruitment. One of the challenges for Sweden has obviously not just been the universities, but the fact that it's so hard for students to stay in Sweden after they graduate. And that is something that doesn't have anything to do with the quality of university, but it's linked to something else, which I think this new ranking is supposed to try, or the new ranking is trying to assess, which is employability. And how easy or how hard it is to get a job also within the region. So I think there is a huge potential for Swedish universities to attract also much more students at the undergraduate level. But to succeed there, you have to look at other conditions, not just the quality of the university.
Okay, thank you very much, Sylvia. Shall we continue with Charles, and then we end with Sven, who has already been on stage. So please, Charles.
Thank you. I will try to do two things here. First, I want to draw my own conclusions of what I've heard today, very briefly. And then I want to make a proposal about how to do things differently. So I have learned that ranking is basically rubbish, except in the case of citations. Several people have said that. Citations is the only thing we can use, and the others are just disturbing the pictures. Well, you don't agree, but I might also be a little provocative now. And of course, one thing that this avoids is assigning weights to various indicators. You don't need to do that if you have one. And it's also said that, of course, citations is a much better indicator than publication, because of the papers that are unpublished. They don't contribute to the accumulation of knowledge. So, I understand that universities have to relate to the rankings and so on, but they are not very interesting as such from a scientific point of view, for example. Instead, I think that the important thing to do is to talk about basic purpose of the whole thing, and that is to, as I see it, to enhance excellence and improve performance at various levels. It can be for Sweden, for Swedish universities, for individual disciplines, as you were into, Sylvia, and so on. And it can be between universities or in one university over time. So the headline of the rest of what I will say is basically disaggregation. I think that many people have said, and I've learned, or I knew it already, that not universities as a whole should be ranked. We should lower the aggregation level. And but I want to go further than anyone else have done here, by saying that the citation analysis at an aggregated level, I mean at a university level, for example, is a bit complicated. It's sometimes questioned, and it's not completely transparent. Not even the Leiden thing, I think, is completely transparent, and therefore sometimes lacks legitimacy, and is associated with uncertainty. So my proposal is that citation analysis should be done at the level of the individual. And I'm looking at some old PowerPoints now, and they are from 2011. And it was a presentation at the so-called Forskningsberedningen. And I think that Peter had absorbed some of the things that I was saying 3 years ago. So to do it at an individual level is simple, it's costless, basically costless, and I will say why. It's transparent, it's legitimate, it's democratic, and it can be done immediately. Quite appealing, right? Of course, part of the story is that all this is done already. Everyone is already doing this, looking at oneself or at others at the citation data. I think that this should be done systematically and in a transparent way. And the reason that it is costless is that it can be done through self-declaration. Any vice chancellor or president can demand that all employees with research time in their position declares the number of citations, according to some rules, of course. It can be at the end of the year. It could be as a part of the annual report of the center or something like that. And there, of course, a method must be developed, but a draft of that method has been developed by Olof, and you can find that in the Circle annual report from the last 10 years, because Circle has been doing this. To do this yourself, for 98% of the researchers, it will take only 30 minutes. And for people with very common names or a very large number of citations, it will take some more time. This would also, in a very powerful way, distinguish researchers with a very high quality of the research from the majority. It's a matter of thousands of citations as opposed to tens of citations. So it's much clearer than to measure publications. When this has been done, it can be aggregated, and it can be aggregated to a research group, to a department, to a faculty, or to a university, and it would have a solid base. Some of the advantages of this would be to that basic resources can be allocated through this mechanism partly, which is already done partly, as we heard Peter Honeth say. And it can also be used at the appointment of positions, and it is used all the time, of course.
But Charles, what would the big difference be? I mean, today we aggregate citations that we collect on the individual level, and as you say, I mean, it's extremely easy to do that.
It's not done like that. It's never published at the individual level.
That's true, but I mean, another part of what you're saying is that you want to disaggregate it not only to the individual level, but to the institution or the department.
If you have
because
it at
this is what aggregates up when you look at university, of course.
But
then you look at
my approach would be a bottom-up instead of a top-down process.
Okay. Then I think it is up to the universities if they want to install incentive structures where you have the funding distributed in accordance with your citation. I mean, they could do that.
Yes,
they could adopt that strategy immediately, perhaps.
If they want to do that, if it's politically possible to do that, they could do that. And one final advantage of this would be that it would also point to researchers who do not have citations, and it's a bit tough, but maybe it's better to do something else for some people. And we heard that you get highly cited if you write something which is wrong. Yeah, that might happen, but it's still a minor part of all citations. Okay, we disagree. Another point of criticism is that your friend cite you. That's not really true. If you check your own citations, you will find that it's not. And of course, if you do it on the individual level, you can compensate for co-publishing, you can compensate for self-citation, and for part-time research and so on. I think I stop here. One more thing. I think that this could be combined not with other indicators, but with peer review. These are the two important mechanisms, and they should be combined.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. Let's get back to that. Thank you. And now to Sven then, and I hope the computer is working now, right? Okay.
Well, I don't think I used the computer now. I used most of my time, I think, during the last session. Okay. But just a few statements here. Going back to the title, what do university rankings mean for university sciences, etc.? I think if I start with funding agencies, I would say that they shouldn't be used at all. There are no use, except, as I mentioned before, at a higher level to look at what is the performance of the country as a whole. Perhaps they could be of some help in what we are doing. For the researchers, I think they could be not of that much use, but in order to be of any use, they have to be divided into research areas. And then they would perhaps add something to what you mentioned, the citation analysis. I mean, we heard this about the multi-ranking. There are additional indicators there that might be of interest for the researchers to look into. I mean, we heard about from the universities how they think about it. I think that was very nice presentations. I don't have that much to add to that, except maybe a couple of questions. I hear often that people spend a lot of time writing proposals to the research council. So my question is, how much do the universities, how much time and cost are related to submit data to these rankings, especially since there are so many of them? Or is it done completely automatic? Maybe we can discuss that later. Maybe one issue that I think is really important is how to involve students more in this. We know that the students have a great interest in this ranking list, but they don't provide that much information. So that might be something also to universities to think about. How do you involve students when you consider these rankings, and are there things there that you can improve to climb on these rankings? So these were two questions to the universities. And I mean, to this discussion about citations, I think it's there is actually a lot of research going on citations. So I think one should maybe look into that a little bit more detail. And I think these false citations are not that common. I mean, that's research has shown that they are very few, very rare, and doesn't affect that much the outcome. So yeah, I would just like to add that to this discussion about citation.
Okay, thank you, Sven. But when we apply for funding these days, we often have a little table or a paragraph saying that that's my citation, that's my rank, and so on. Is that something that is taken seriously? Now, I know it's not you personally, it's the committees, but I mean, do they weigh in those factors, would you believe, or?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. Before I was Secretary General for the Natural and Engineering Sciences, and we submitted instructions to the reviewers how to deal with citation data. We asked in the proposals, we asked for these numbers specifically, and then we put, let's say, weight on how much that should count in the assessment of the proposals. If you go to the medicine and health, another of our scientific boards, they specifically not ask for citation data. They don't want them. And that's a decision by their board to not think about them. And of course, this is to put more emphasis on the future. With citations, okay, you get information about what has been done. Sometimes, long time ago, and your H index always increases. So one has to be careful about that.
So that would put a veil on novelty and uniqueness in a sense.
Yeah, and the way it works now at the Research Council, the different councils, they have some freedom to do it in their own way.
Okay, thank you, Sven. I think that the governmental funds, when they distribute them across universities, 20% or something like that is allocated with reference to citations. Am I correct? Or is it 10? Okay, but maybe it was the objective when I was at the Globalization Council and we discussed that. But anyway, at KTH, my own university then, when they apply the same principle internally, it's only 2% that is distributed with regard to citation, linking to what you said, Charles, and that is sort of a disincentive then, in a way, one could say. Would you, gentlemen, would you be prepared to sort of increase the internal allocation based on citation, as Charles has proposed here? Do we have a microphone?
It was you who proposed that. I only gave the basis for it.
Yeah, precisely. I'm not as careful as you are in my...
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, please.
I think you should be extremely careful when you start to redistribute money based on these things, because there are a number of questions you have to ask. One is, why should you do it? Is it because you actually want to move substantial money from one area to another based on where they perform best, or is it because you want to give an incentive to researchers to behave generally in a different way, for example, publish more in better journals? If it's the latter, you don't need to move around a lot of money to get that incentive. That's my very clear experience from having been working on things like this for a long time. And also, it's easy to say that 20%, that's much more radical than 10% or than 2%. But one thing is that how large share of a block budget do you actually put into a model? And it's a completely different question how much money actually will change ownership from one year to another. And that depends completely on how you calibrate that model. So you can put 100% of the money into a model. And then, of course, still Lund, if you take all of Lund's block grant and put it into a model, and then Lund will get something next year, they won't get zero. And they won't get all the money in Sweden. They will get either a little bit more or a little bit less than they got last year. So you should be very careful when you talk about how much money you reallocate. And in real life, of course, you can't move a lot of money between university or
within
well, between or within from one year to another without really high costs. I mean, we can say, okay, let's half the budget of economics and double it in sociology. Surely you can do that over time, but not between November and January.
That's for sure. But at the same time, you need to implement some sort of dynamic factors here, I think. I think it's Michael Porter who has argued that the European universities are in the same situation as the middle-sized firms were 15, 20 years ago. Quite complacent, things puff along pretty well, but there is a lot of things happening out there. And how is this, so to speak, business model? How does it work, and how will it work in the future? Are there challenges that will hit us and we'll be a bit surprised if we look ahead 5, 10 years? That was a little parenthesis. Per.
I think also you have to be careful, so I fully agree. And there is different tools that university has used. For instance, Uppsala has used this Basto model and take some percent and reallocate to that. And it's also about timing. When you have a budget that is growing, for instance, we had a RQ08 that when you were president, Göran Bixell, and then you could really use the reviewing to give some extra money to the very best groups. I think that was a very good incentive. During my time, we have been very, very successful. I think it's tremendous successful on getting new things, Max 4 and ESS. But it has been so demanding to the budget that all the money we have of new money is allocated to keep the research infrastructure. So that means that what we can do, in fact, in practice, is that looking into the future, and we could give some signal values. So if you put, for instance, that suggestion from Charles, I think the most important things is that you will publish about the best researchers, and then you get a positive model. And we already have that, so we know of some of our researchers, and we congratulate them. And I think also they become a role model for other researchers. And this is very important, the value of signals.
I think that the success in attracting ESS and Max here also implies some budgetary concerns for other universities.
Very small amount compared to, we have to allocate 130 million every year, and that goes of 10 years, 1,300,000,000. And compared to the other universities, only a couple of 5 million or something. So don't complain.
Okay.
Be happy.
Okay. Be happy. Don't worry. There were a couple of questions from Sven also, but maybe you'd like to address them.
No, I just thought about maybe one should try to get the access to research infrastructure into these ranking models. So if university has a good, the researchers have good access to research infrastructure locally, that should raise their ranking. I don't know if it, to some extent, is included in this models at present.
Any questions from you? Please raise your hand. Feel free anytime.
Sven, I can comment that this is not included in the model, but we would like it to be, of course. But in the fact that this is international and national, we have to be very careful, because when we are, so to say, located together with them and then promote them, the other university have something to say. So in fact, they have a very strong brand, ESS and Max 4, but that brand is not so strongly connected to Lund University as I would like to see.
There's a question down there. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Nicholas Trenaeus, and I work at the Swedish Institute. I have a question. I actually looked something up on Google here regarding actually the performance measurement of education, which has been mentioned a couple of times. I mean, although most of the discussion is about performance measuring of research, there is something called the assessment of higher education learning outcomes that is, I think, done. Well, it's done by the OECD, obviously, and I'm just wondering if any of the panelists or the other speakers or anyone else know anything about this and the progression that, because this is something that was launched a few years ago, and I'm just curious because it has sometimes, I think, mistakenly been referred to as a kind of PISA of higher education. But it would be interesting to hear about it, if anybody has anything to add.
I know what you're talking about, and I think there are different age cohorts, and they do actually assess the skills with regard to different subjects in this survey that you are referring to. Anyone who would like to address this? But I know that Sweden fares pretty well in that as compared to PISA, actually. It may be a time sort of lag, but I know that they're actually doing much better there. Ranked 5 to 10, basically, in most of these subjects. I think it's 3 or 4 they have. Sven, you had a couple of questions to the chancellors. Would you like to rephrase them? Or sorry, was there another? Okay, then.
Can you answer the cost question?
Okay, go ahead. Mike is there.
Yeah, you asked the question of how much time we spend on giving information to rankings. We discussed it here, me and my colleague, and I think we spend 4-5 weeks. Not more. Not less. On getting the information ready for giving it into the rankings. Some things are very easy. Some things require a lot more work to get access to. And that's also one of the factors in regards to U-Multirank. We're not participating from Lund University. It's based on the Lero decision, but it's also a very time-consuming initiative. And I have to say that I personally is a bit relieved that we're not participating, because I think it will be a lot of work, and I'm not sure what we get in return for it. My second thing that I would like to say is to come back to Sylvia's, what you said about the alumni. We see that when we publish about rankings, it's the alumni that repost, share, say, this is my university, I went here, because that strengthens their personal brand when they go on to doctorate studies, or for an employee, say, I studied at the top 100 university. And it is really one of the key interests or target groups or stakeholders for the rankings.
And it should be combined with a huge donation every time you improve your rankings, right? Sven, you had one more question that I forgot, actually.
That was about how to involve students. At the university level, maybe, and also into I mean, how to define the indicators in the ranking list. But that's maybe a difficult question to answer here. But at the university level, how do you include the students in relation to
are they
rankings?
aware? I mean, or yeah.
Well, I can't say we include students in. Well, we had like a working or a little project trying to learn more about rankings. Then, of course, students were part of it. We don't include students in our ranking policy, but in all other aspects of quality assessment or quality control system development, of course, they are deeply involved, including. That's in a sense a different topic, but the present UKÄ system for evaluating higher education is much debated, and one of the points of concern is that the way it's being done, students are very much excluded from it, and that the new system coming have to be more inclusive in that sense.
One thing that we have seen is, of course, working stronger with alumni, and another thing is, of course, recruiting non-European students. And we have been gaining. I think the figures, the last figure we get this autumn, is in fact almost the same as before. We had to take tuition fee. We are the strongest university of recruiting outside Europe, and I think this becomes a positive situation for us. And this is also an open budget, so we can have more and more of these students. And I think it's also increase our reputation, because they look really in detail of Lund University. But also, to be honest, The reason why international students come here is not only because education and research, it's because the student's life in Lund is wonderful.
Sure. So students and alumni are perhaps the most important recipient groups when it comes to communicating this ranking. Let me ask, sorry, Charles.
I wanted to maybe add to this. A long time ago, I was a student at Berkeley, and already at that time, the students organized themselves evaluations of the courses and the teachers. And now I know that they do it over the internet. I'm surprised if students at Lund in Sweden don't do that. Is it not so? Okay.
Partly, I would guess, but yeah. Yeah. Do we have a microphone? Ron? And then
at Utrecht University, my other university, all students evaluate all courses, right? And they have just a standard.
But that's organized by the university, right?
Yes,
right. Yeah.
a standard questionnaire. So you can compare between courses, right? So they give an overall score but also they go much into detail. How good was the lecturer? How about tutorials, quality of tutorial? It really goes into detail. So if you, I don't think they do that, but if you could make an effort and compare that, but of course still you then have the problem, you do it at the course level. You also would like to hear from students what they think about the overall curriculum, right? Whether it's coherent, whether there's a diversity of methods, teaching methods, things like that. So in that sense, they could approve. But still, I mean, so it is possible, but you should really want to do that, and then you can.
Yeah, right.
Charles' question. The students are involved in several levels, at least here at Lund University. That's the university I know. Course evaluation, of course, but also in student barometers that are done a few years after they finish their studies, when you can see where have they gone, what kind of jobs have they got, salaries, a bit more of that information, and also if they were satisfied with their studies. They're published, but they're not very well spread, actually, and we could probably do a better job with that. But there's also, on a national level, I think it's Studentliv, a newspaper or a paper that publish a ranking of university cities. A bit broader perspective also on the living costs and how easy it is to get a flat. Lund is never in the top. But they also send out a survey to the students for that one.
Okay, thank you. Getting back to Sylvia, one question concerning visibility. I mean, are we too focused on these rankings instead of trying to develop and upgrade our own the internal university capacity to market themselves at important, for instance, student markets, if you may call it that?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that in two aspects. I mean, one is that when I was working in China, that's something that became very clear, was that, for example, Swedish universities were so intent on competing with each other that they were not really focusing on jointly accessing a market that hasn't been accessed sufficiently. And I think you can see that it's interesting with the introduction of tuition fees. I think, for example, the University of Lund, what's striking is that Lund is doing very well now at attracting foreign students again, but there are huge gaps in some of the markets that are just not being accessed. For example, to my knowledge, there's no foreign student from Nigeria, which is the largest market in Africa, or very few. I looked at exactly, maybe if it's less than 5. That's according to the data I got. And it's similar with Malaysia. So there are certain sort of black holes, and I think to access these markets, you're not going to succeed. It's not efficient to go out only on your own. You're marketing the image of Sweden because it's a very strong image, and then you have to differentiate your university. The other big question, which I don't have an opinion on, but is obviously the question of a more strategic presence of Swedish universities in certain markets, which is something that I don't see a lot of discussion around, but which is an interesting question with, for example, top-ranking US universities or British universities doing everything from establishing campuses to, you know, it's very difficult, but that's something that I think is not happening.
In fact, we have discussed this between the vice chancellor of the university, at least the biggest university, and we are saying that when we go far away, we go together. For instance, when we were in Brazil, we invited the other university. When we now go to Indonesia in some weeks, we invite all the other university. And I think I totally agree, and I think we have been quite stupid of not going for Sweden as number one, and then second for our university. And it's a total system, in fact. So I've often said that, well, we welcome you to Sweden, and if you will have a discussion of another university, we will help.
Okay, any questions from the audience? Yes, right. Please.
Markus Kilic from Circle, and I have a question about the link between the rankings and individual behavior, because to some extent the rankings should be are the aggregate of individual behavior, but how can you really create incentives on individual behavior? I heard Charles, but then if one thinks about what one should do, like in research, create novelty. So do I create incentive for publishing 10 papers or one good one in 2 years, and how do I measure this? It seems to be very complicated to me.
Precisely, and this is where the system tends to drive us in one direction. Charles, you're waving your hand.
Of course, all systems lead to changes in behavior, and those changes in behavior might not be to the positive, it might be detrimental. For example, probably the best thing a junior researcher could do to get a lot of citation would be to publish a paper written together with Boschma. Therefore, there would automatically come a lot of citation because he's so well known, and the student would get half of that. So I mean, all systems lead to, and this is very complicated, as you said yourself.
Sylvia?
Just one more thing I wanted to mention on the last topic, which is it's very interesting when you look at how countries work abroad. For example, in Swedish embassies, one of the largest one in Beijing, there is nobody specifically appointed for higher education to deal with the promotion of higher education. So this is where Sweden differs dramatically from Germany, UK, France, but even smaller countries. And so when you talk to the Swedish embassy in Beijing, they'll say, oh, you know, we don't have time, we're dealing with other things. So I think this is one thing also from a policy perspective. And it also means that it's extremely difficult for Swedish universities to assess incoming students because they have no system. They're always dependent on themselves. They have to be able to assess a Chinese CV when they don't know the context, whereas other countries have, you know, science counselors or education counselors based in the strategic markets that are actually doing the interviews. So that's a concrete policy issue that I think is...
We need Peter Honeth, but he left. But that is a concrete policy measure, definitely. Yes, Sven.
Small detail in relation to that. I think I mentioned also earlier that if a scientist has a certain amount of money, could hire a postdoc or a PhD student, it's highly likely that the postdoc will produce papers that are more highly cited at higher level research compared to the PhD student. So in a short term, that would pay off. That strategy would pay off. But I think in the long term, it's of course a negative thing. So one has to be a little bit careful there. And I think in some of these rankings, the number of PhD students is counted. So that maybe make a balance to that. But I think it's important to think about these kind of things.
Per?
I will also add that I think that Sweden should really see that it's really an asset, very high value of the Swedish university, international. We have, I think, in the international competition, we have been running fairly well. If you compare to the Swedish industry, and we don't have to take the example of Astra or Pharmacia, but if you compare what Sweden used to be of the big companies, they have been losing
but the university is still very strong. And I've been in different conference contact with different countries and say that I will join the group, but then I have to have some time to talk about the Swedish university system. But that has been, for instance, denied, because I say it's more valuable by business, by the industry. But I think they are doing a wrong decision. So then I, of course, not been traveling. But I think that should be a new issue for a new government, that they could really also use the strong reputation of the Swedish university in connection with foreign countries and in connection with Swedish industry.
In attracting foreign firms?
Both, in both, because getting more international and also very high reputation, that all the Swedish university, I think it is even stronger than the competition of the companies.
Okay, thank you. I believe it's time to wrap up, and we're competing with the drinks and snacks soon here, which is tough. But I think the question you raised goes deeper than the discussion that we had here, because it relates to what kind of research are we doing? Are we doing sort of abrovinkel, if anyone can translate that, or doing those tiny sort of amendments to already established research, because we know we will get the publication by using that particular model, but changing a very tiny part of it? Or are we doing something that is really unique and novel, and do we have time to do that, because we need those publications for our academic careers? And that, I think, is a crucial question, and it relates very much to the ranking criteria, of course. I don't know if anyone would like to address that, or we leave it as a cliffhanger and we wrap up. Ron?
Right? So novelty of research is not really taken up in those rankings, because in fact what you say, if you do what Thomas Kuhn always said, normal science, I mean you do basically what others have already and what you have been doing in the past, and you just add a bit to that. And you get much more citations. Sure. You get more easily publish your papers. You get much more easy funding, because peers that will review it, they can recognize what's in the proposal, and they can immediately link in. But if I do a very novel proposal that people are not yet familiar with, I will have a very low chance to get funding. I will not, it will be very hard to publish that paper at all in a good journal. It will take 5 to 6 years to get it published at all, and you have to accept a very low impact journal to get that published. So you see, I mean, it's not easy to take that up in those ranking, and that of course is, I think it's quite a challenge for universities to still appreciate that type of efforts. But it's not easy to really measure that and see who is actually doing that.
Precisely. Sven?
I think that's one of the tasks for us as a research council when we assess proposals, that we should educate the peers to look for those breakthrough ideas. And we should, those criteria that address them should be weighted higher than doing this normal type of research. So this is something that we constantly think about, how to motivate breakthrough research. It's not easy, but for sure it has to be stressed.
And there you also have the aspect of interdisciplinary research, where very much of funding is geared towards particular disciplines. Please.
I totally agree with you here. But even if you get your paper published in a newspaper here, it doesn't help you, because people don't understand what you're talking about. And therefore, you are not increasing your citation index. So there's a problem here. But I always, in my talks, I'm always giving Shakeman as an example. I mean, Shakeman got a Nobel Prize for something here, which in principle is very simple. It's a 5-fold crystal symmetry here. But it took him 30 years. 30 years. And during these 30 years, even other Nobel laureates questioned all the time what he was doing. And that means that his university in Israel was not willing here to host him anymore. So, I mean, this is exactly what I mean here. Why I'm questioning these citation indexes here. Because they are not stimulating, you see, really first-round research. And this is something which we have discussed now in international conferences here, and I will do it in a couple of weeks in Berlin again. If we are depending here on issues like citation index or from the research funding here, with the goal of producing a new product on the market, where are the new ideas for the future are coming? So you see, we cannot do it here, you see, here, and at the same time, more or less distinguish basic research. And basic research, you see, if you're really in the front line, will not show up in the citation index.
That's the genuine challenges for environments like this, to create that creative environment. And it's difficult with these incentives that we face. Now we're going to wrap up, definitively. And a final word from the panelists, or we leave it at that. Then I would like to ask Ron if you have any concluding remarks, or I think we all agree that we are, to some extent, in a lock-in situation. We have to deal with it. There are real effects linked to that. I think the chancellors have explained in a way how they look at it, and we have heard other views as well here. But if you like to add in something, there's been some actually concrete policy suggestions also. Ron, if not?
Well, of course, I would like, well, to wrap up would be too hard because I'm also tired. No, I think I didn't know anything about university rankings before I started organizing this workshop, so I really learned a lot. Really, I must say I've quite well. I think there's some kind of general agreement on a few things, and let me just check whether that's the case. Right? Composite indicator of university rankings. Let's forget about it. Right? It's unrealistic. We should not do that. While these all basic university rankings are really about that, and at least that is at least taken up by the media. Of course, there's much more behind those rankings, and the details are not taken up by the media, of course. So that I think it's one thing. Second thing is that I would really like to see that those rankings are made at the level of well-defined disciplines, right? Because then you already get rid of a lot of problems we talked about today. So it's not about universities, it's about getting well-defined disciplines and compare those groups of people and in different institutes that belong to the same discipline. And then I think you get a much more honest assessment. I really like this idea of this multi-rank because, yes, I agree, Charles, that citations are of course quite easy to measure, and I think they might also say a lot, but they are not unproblematic. And I think we already discussed that a bit. But what on top of what we have not yet discussed about what is bad about citations is that that you can manipulate them, right? So for me, it would not be easy. It would not be difficult
to increase my citations in 2 years from now. I just connect with my network worldwide, and I make sure, well, okay, let's make an agreement between all of us. Let's cite each other, right? And I know that is going on. I mean, it's not. I mean, there are sometimes journals even that if your article has already been accepted, and they look at your reference list, and then they tell me that I still have to add 3 or 4 references in the reference list. Most of the time, those are by accident reference to their own journal articles, but also particular people, and I guess though either they're editors or reviewers that have been involved. So I mean, I think citation is still a good indicator, but okay, there are problems, and I think I would really like to see a multi-rank in which many different dimensions are taken up, and I think that is something, well, where we in fact can still improve a lot, and there are 2 ways of doing that. Bibliometric analysis, and I think we can do a better job with bibliometric analysis as they are handled so far, even in certain mission activities. I mean, in the Netherlands I know there's a really nice project going on, in fact supported by the Dutch Scientific Council, in which they try to look at valorization of research and how that can be measured. And for example, there's a quite simple measure of media exposure by scientists. So you can easily use software to identify that. So that's also in development. So it's bibliometric, but peer reviews could also is always necessary to get a more comprehensive and complete picture. But probably I'm already talking too much now.
Thanks, Ron. I think we're running over time here.
Yes.
I mean, citations are normally, they are field normalized, so to speak. So the part of it is in there. I also learned a lot, and I like to thank the panelists, the current one and the previous one. I like to thank the 2 of you for participating, and all of you that have joined us today. Our next big thing at Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum, one thing with Mariana Mazzucato, 1st or 2nd of October, we have a conference together with the Sweden Statistics. Then on October 8th, we have something on the future of the Swedish life science sector, if you're interested, with Leif Johansson and several other prominent people. So that's all for now. Go to our webpage and you can find out. Per, you like to say something? We're glad that you have hosted this.
Thank you very much, and I can also agree that I was using a part of my thesis was on a refused article from one German professor, but it was refused because it was so new in the field, but I used it in my thesis. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you all.